They tell us the game belongs to us. That when we step into the stadium or sit down on a Sunday afternoon with millions of others, we are part of something sacred. The roar of the crowd, the sound of helmets colliding, the sight of the ball spiraling into the autumn air of it feels raw, unfiltered, alive, but that is only the illusion. Beneath the chants and cheers lies a truth fans were never meant to see. The NFL is not simply a league of teams and players. It is a machine of control, carefully engineered to shape what we watch, what we believe, and even what we remember. I learned early that football is not just played on the field, it is dictated from the shadows. The NFL's most decisive victories have never been scored on a scoreboard. They've been written in contracts, carved into laws, and whispered in meetings where no fan has ever been invited. This is the story of the hidden power that has guided the game for more than half a century, a power so complete that most of us don't even notice it working. Consider this. In 1961, the NFL faced a crisis. Teams negotiated television contracts individually, and smaller market clubs struggled to survive. But in a smoky boardroom, Commissioner Pete Rozelle proposed something radical. He convinced Congress to pass the Sports Broadcasting Act, a law that allowed the league to pool its television rights and sell them as one. Overnight, the NFL transformed from a collection of competing franchises into a centralized empire. That single act changed everything. It meant that no matter how bad a team was, no matter how small the city, every owner shared equally in the billions that followed. It gave the league leverage over networks, leverage over players, leverage over cities. Fans at home just saw football on television. They didn't see the invisible hand pulling the strings. That invisible hand has never let go. Every blackout rule, every relocation threat, every so-called safety initiative is not just about the game, it's about control. The NFL controls how the game is seen, how it is remembered, and who profits. When a player takes a knee, when a concussion lawsuit makes headlines, when a city balks at paying for a stadium, the league does not leave the outcome to chance. It responds with precision, with spin, with an arsenal of tools designed to protect its brand and reinforce its dominance. And yet, for decades, fans have believed they are the heartbeat of the sport. Without us, there is no game, we say. But in reality, the NFL has always treated us not as owners of the game, but as pieces on a chessboard. Our cheers are useful, our outrage is fuel, our loyalty is profit. The league has studied us, marketed to us, manipulated us, and all the while convinced us that we are in control. We are not. Think of the moments that define the NFL in the public memory. The rise of Monday Night Football in the 1970s. The Super Bowl becoming a national holiday. The Fox contract in 1993 that restructured the entire television landscape. None of those were accidents. Each was the result of boardroom battles and billion-dollar deals that determined not just who played where, but how we consumed the game itself. The field may have been contested by players, but the future of football was being decided by men in suits we never saw. Take the blackouts, for example. For decades, the league enforced a policy that if a stadium didn't sell out, the local broadcast would be pulled. Fans at home would be punished for not buying tickets. The stated reason was to encourage attendance. The real reason was leverage an artificial scarcity that reminded cities who truly held power. Families gathered around darkened televisions, angry at their team, never realizing it was the league itself that had orchestrated the blackout. That is control. Or consider the labor wars of the 1980s. When players went on strike in 1982 and 1987, the NFL didn't just fight them in the boardroom. It fought them in the court of public opinion. Replacement players were brought in, games were televised, and fans were told that millionaire athletes were greedy. The narrative worked. The strikes collapsed. Owners won. Players returned with less leverage than before. Fans thought they had made up their own minds, but in truth, they'd been guided toward the league's position. Their emotions weaponized against the very athletes they cheered for. That is control. it extends beyond economics. It reaches into politics. Few realize how deeply the NFL has influenced legislation, lobbying Congress to secure antitrust exemptions, public financing for stadiums, and tax loopholes that save billions. When lawmakers question the league's power, donations appear, campaigns are funded, and suddenly the pressure fades. The game goes on. We see touchdowns. We do not see the lobbying reports filed behind closed doors in Washington. But perhaps the most chilling form of control is cultural. The NFL has become not just a league, but a storyteller. It decides what gets remembered and what gets forgotten. NFL Films, once described by Steve Sabal as the mythology factory, didn't just record games, it sculpted them into legends. It made Vince Lombardi larger than life. It turned the Ice Bowl into epic poetry. It rewrote the history of football as a heroic struggle, carefully edited to hide the violence, the injuries, the broken bodies. Fans didn't just watch highlights. They absorbed a crafted mythology that shaped how generations thought about the game. That is control. And when scandals threatened that mythology, the league responded with a precision that would make political operatives jealous. Concussions, downplayed for decades until lawsuits forced disclosure. Spygate, contained, controlled, minimized, domestic violence, handled with inconsistent punishments until public outrage forced reform. The NFL has perfected the art of narrative suppression, ensuring that the darkest truths are never allowed to dominate the conversation for long. Still, fans believe in the purity of the game, and that belief is the league's greatest weapon. Because when you love something deeply, you overlook its shadows. You excuse its flaws. You trust its leaders. The NFL knows this. It has built an empire on that trust, while carefully ensuring that the real decisions, the decisions about money, power, and influence, remain invisible. This is the story of that invisible power. It is a journey into the hidden corridors where the NFL has shaped not only the sport, but the culture of America itself. From the boardrooms of New York to the halls of Congress, from the control rooms of television networks to the offices of gambling companies, the league has extended its reach far beyond the field. It has built an empire so vast, so ingrained, that most fans never question it. But here, in this story, we will question it. We will uncover how a game that appears chaotic on the field has been orchestrated with precision off it. We will reveal how the league that prides itself on parity and competition has manipulated rules, markets, and narratives to maintain dominance. We will explore how the NFL, more than any other sports league, has mastered the art of control and how that control has shaped generations of fans without them ever realizing it. The NFL tells us the game belongs to us. The truth is, it never has. This is the dark side of the National Football League. This is the story of power without accountability, influence without transparency, and control without consent. When people talk about football, they talk about the games, the dynasties, the rivalries, the unforgettable plays that seem etched into the soul of America. They talk about Joe Montana driving the 49ers down the field in the final minutes, about Lawrence Taylor breaking through a line like an unstoppable force of nature, about Tom Brady orchestrating comebacks that felt almost preordained. These are the images burned into our memory, the ones that make the sport feel larger than life. But the deeper truth is this: the National Football League has never been defined solely by what happens on the field. The game itself, the passes, the hits, the touchdowns, has always been only part of the story. The greater story is the system of power that surrounds it, controls it, and profits from it. This is not a conspiracy theory. It is history. History written not in playbooks, but in contracts. Not in touchdowns, but in television rights. Not in scoreboards, but in laws and lobbyist filings. The NFL is the most powerful sports league in the world because it has mastered something no other league has perfected: the ability to operate as both a sport and a corporation, as both a cultural touchstone and a political force. That dual identity is its greatest strength, its darkest secret. When the NFL was founded in 1920, it was little more than a loose association of teams scattered across the Midwest. Games were played in small towns, in front of modest crowds, often with little organization. Players worked second jobs because football didn't pay enough to live on. But even in those early days, there were men who understood that the game could be more than entertainment. They saw that football, with its violence and its strategy, its ritual and its pageantry, had the potential to capture the American imagination. And they also saw that controlling the game meant controlling the money, the cities, the fans themselves. The rise of the NFL cannot be told without understanding this hunger for control. It explains how the league survived the Great Depression. It explains how it outlasted rival leagues. It explains how it turned Sunday afternoons into a national ritual. And it explains why today, in an age of fractured media and countless entertainment options, the Super Bowl remains the single most watched television event in America. The league has never been content to simply put on games. It has always sought to shape the narrative around them, to engineer scarcity, to wield influence, and to make sure that nothing not players, not politicians, not even fans threatens its dominance. That control begins with ownership. Unlike most industries, the NFL is run by a small, exclusive club of billionaires. To own a team is not just to own a business, is to be part of one of the most powerful private fraternities in American life. These owners do not compete with one another in the way teams do on the field. They collaborate, they vote, they collude when necessary. Decisions about relocation, expansion, labor, and even rules are made in these rooms, behind closed doors, with little input from the public. The commissioner may be the face, but the owners are the true power. And the way they wield that power has shaped every aspect of the sport. It extends into television. No other league has ever understood the medium of television like the NFL. In the 1950s, it embraced the small screen as a way to bring football into every living room. In the 1960s, it consolidated rights, forcing networks to negotiate with the league as one. That centralization made the NFL an empire. The deals that followed ABC's Monday Night Football, Fox's billion-dollar bid in 1993, ESPN's embrace of primetime transformed not just the league, but television itself. The NFL dictated terms, engineered broadcast windows, and used scarcity to make each game feel like a national event. Today, those contracts are worth tens of billions of dollars, and they remain the lifeblood of the league. But with that money came influence over what games are shown, how they are framed, and what stories are told. It reaches into politics. Few fans realize that the NFL has an active lobbying arm in Washington. It has fought for antitrust exemptions, for tax breaks, for favorable legislation. For years, the league itself was technically classified as a nonprofit, a designation that saved millions in taxes. Cities that resisted funding new stadiums were threatened with relocation. Politicians who supported the league found themselves rewarded with campaign contributions. The NFL may sell itself as apolitical, but it has never been neutral. Its fingerprints are all over the laws and policies that allow it to operate with near total control. Even the rules of the game, often framed as issues of fairness or safety, have been shaped by hidden motives. Consider how the league has altered pass interference rules, overtime structures, or replay systems. Ostensibly, these changes were about clarity and fairness. In reality, they often serve to boost offense, to increase scoring, to keep games close because close. High-scoring games keep viewers watching. Safety initiatives, while real in some respects, have also been leveraged as public relations shields, protecting the league's image while masking the deeper crisis of brain trauma. The power of the NFL is not only economic or political, it is cultural. The league has positioned itself as a mirror of American values: toughness, resilience, teamwork, meritocracy. Through NFL films, through commercials, through carefully chosen halftime shows, It has cultivated an image of football as a reflection of the nation itself. That branding has been so effective that to criticize the NFL often feels, to some fans, like criticizing America itself. This is by design. The league has tied itself to patriotism, to military flyovers, to anthems sung before every game. It has turned football into ritual, and ritual is the most powerful form of control. At times, this cultural power has been tested. The concussion crisis threatened to expose the violence at the core of the game. The Ray Rice scandal exposed failures in discipline and accountability. Colin Kaepernick's protest forced the league to confront its position on race and free speech. In each case, the NFL responded not just with action, but with narrative. Settlements were paid, rules were adjusted, statements were released, but just as important, the story was managed. The league has always understood that controlling the story is as vital as controlling the game. This documentary will reveal how that control operates across 15 dimensions. We will begin with the roots of power, how a single law in 1961 transformed the league into a centralized empire. We will examine the owners' club, the labor wars, and the manipulation of television. We will explore how stadium politics turned cities into bargaining chips, how rule changes served hidden agendas, and how scandals were suppressed or redirected. We will see how gambling, once shunned, became a cornerstone of profit. We will follow the money into Washington, into global expansion, into technology and data that treat players as assets and fans as consumers. Each chapter will show how the NFL's hidden power is not an accident, is the product of deliberate choices, calculated strategies, and relentless pursuit of control. Together, these stories reveal a league that has mastered the art of influence, often at the expense of transparency, fairness, or even the very players who make the game possible. For fans, this journey may be uncomfortable. It will challenge the idea that the NFL is simply a game played for our enjoyment. It will show how our loyalty has been cultivated, monetized, and, at times, exploited. But it will also reveal why the NFL has become the most dominant league in the world, not just because of what happens on Sundays, but because of what happens every other day of the week behind doors we were never meant to open. By the end of this story, we will see the NFL not only as a sport, but as a system of control. And in understanding that system, we can finally see the game for what it truly is. When you look at the modern NFL, its billions in revenue, its global reach, its grip on American culture, it feels inevitable, like a natural force that always existed. But the truth is far more deliberate. The league's rise wasn't inevitable, it was engineered. And from its earliest days, the NFL's survival depended on one thing above all: control. The seeds were planted in 1920 in a car dealership in Canton, Ohio. The men who gathered there weren't moguls in tailored suits. They were working-class entrepreneurs, team owners from small industrial towns, trying to wrangle order from chaos. Professional football at that time was barely recognizable compared to today. Teams rose and fell in a matter of months. Players jumped contracts for an extra $20. Games were scheduled haphazardly, sometimes the day before kickoff. It was, in every sense, a free-for-all. That kind of instability might have been entertaining, but it wasn't sustainable. The owners understood that without rules, without structure, the sport would devour itself. But what they also understood, perhaps instinctively, was that rules alone weren't enough. Someone had to hold the reins. The league they created in 1920 was fragile, more of a loose coalition than a true institution. Yet, even in those humble beginnings, you can see the DNA of control. Membership was restricted. Teams had to be approved. Schedules had to be coordinated. The message was clear. This wasn't sandlot football anymore. It was something that belonged to the men in the room. By 1925, when the Pottsville Maroons scandal rocked the league, the owners had their first real test of authority. Pottsville had defeated the Chicago Cardinals and claimed what should have been the NFL championship. But they had also played an unauthorized exhibition game in Philadelphia, infringing on another team's territory. The league president, Joe Carr, stripped Pottsville of the title. The decision outraged fans, and nearly a century later, the debate still lingers. Yet what mattered wasn't whether the punishment was fair. What mattered was that the league had drawn a line in the sand. No team was bigger than the system. That moment defined the NFL's ethos. The championship wasn't earned solely on the field, it was sanctioned by the league office. The game, from that point forward, was about more than competition. It was about hierarchy. As the 1930s unfolded, the NFL wrestled with survival through the Great Depression. Teams folded under financial strain. Players often worked second jobs to stay afloat. But amid the turmoil, the league leadership tightened its grip. Territorial rights were formalized. Contracts became binding. A draft system was introduced in 1936 to prevent wealthy franchises from hoarding talent. Each step wasn't just about fairness, it was about control. By dictating who could play where, the league eliminated the chaos of free bidding wars and cemented its role as the central authority. The draft, in particular, was revolutionary. On paper, it was a mechanism of parity, designed to give weaker teams access to the best college players. But its deeper significance was the message it sent. Individual players no longer dictated their destinies. Their professional careers began not with choice, but with assignment. And behind that assignment was the invisible hand of the league. The irony was that fans loved it. The spectacle of the draft, the notion of competitive balance, added drama and narrative to the sport. What the public saw as fairness was, in truth, the consolidation of authority. The NFL had discovered a formula that would guide its future. Frame control as entertainment, and the audience will cheer as their freedoms are stripped away. By the 1940s, as World War II reshaped the nation, the league entered another critical phase. Manpower shortages forced teams to merge temporarily. Like the Steagles of 1943, a hybrid of the Pittsburgh Steelers and Philadelphia Eagles. Yet even in wartime, when chaos could have unraveled the sport, the league survived by enforcing order. It was a reminder that the NFL wasn't just a collection of teams. It was a single organism, and its survival depended on discipline from within. The most decisive moment of consolidation came in the 1950s and 1960s, with the looming threat of competition. The All-America Football Conference challenged the NFL in the late 1940s, forcing it to absorb three of its teams: the Cleveland Browns, the San Francisco 49ers, and the Baltimore Colts. A decade later, the American Football League arrived, armed with television contracts and deep-pocketed owners. The AFL wasn't just a nuisance, it was a direct challenge to the NFL's supremacy. For a time, it looked like professional football might fracture, with two leagues competing for players, fans, and cultural relevance. But here again, the NFL's instinct for control shaped its destiny. Rather than fight indefinitely, the league orchestrated a merger in 1970. The agreement created one unified league with two conferences, a single draft, and a championship game that would soon become the Super Bowl. It was the ultimate consolidation of power. What could have been chaos was transformed into order. What could have been competition became monopoly. And once again, fans embraced it, dazzled by the spectacle of a new, unified professional football empire. Looking back, it's easy to see the pattern. Each crisis: the Pottsville scandal, the Depression, the wartime shortages. The rise of rival leagues was met not with passivity, but with decisive centralization. The NFL's response was always the same: tighten the circle, strengthen the hierarchy, and protect the league above all else. The fans rarely noticed, or if they did, they didn't mind. To them, the product on the field was enough. The drama, the spectacle, the rivalries, these were the things that mattered. The machinery behind the curtain remained invisible, but the machinery was always there. The owners and commissioners understood something fundamental. Professional football wasn't just a sport, it was a product, and like any product, it required strict quality control. You could let games be unpredictable, but you couldn't let the system itself be unpredictable. The system had to be airtight. This philosophy set the stage for everything that would follow the television deals. The labor disputes, the concussion crisis, the franchise relocations. Every controversy and every triumph traces back to those early years when the NFL made a choice. Control would be its lifeblood. As we move deeper into the story, it becomes clear that the NFL's control isn't limited to scheduling games or drafting players. It extends to narratives, to public perception, to the very way fans understand the sport. From the earliest days, the league wasn't just refereeing football, it was shaping reality itself. And it all began in that car dealership in Canton, when a handful of men realized that the only way to build an empire was to ensure that no one else, not teams, not players, not even fans, would ever hold the reins. By the late 1950s, the NFL had survived its growing pains. The league was stable, its hierarchy firm, and its teams increasingly recognizable across the country. But survival was not enough. The real battle, the one that would transform football from a regional pastime into America's most powerful cultural force, was about to begin. And the weapon was not a new rulebook or a stronger commissioner. It was television. Television in post-war America was a miracle, a glowing screen that brought the world into people's living rooms. By 1955, more than half of American households owned a TV set. By 1960, that number had climbed to nearly 90%. Families gathered not just to watch shows, but to share experiences. The NFL understood something that other leagues did not. If football could master television, it could master America. But television presented a paradox. It offered visibility, but it also carried risk. If too many games were televised, attendance at stadiums might collapse. If too few games were shown, football might remain stuck in its provincial shell. To strike the balance, the league turned to its most important tool: control. In 1951, the NFL signed its first television contract, a modest deal with the Dumont Network. For the first time, pro football had a national stage, though the coverage was uneven and limited. The games looked grainy. The production was crude, but the potential was undeniable. Fans who had never set foot inside a stadium could now follow their team from hundreds of miles away. Commissioner Bert Bell recognized the stakes. In 1953, he instituted the NFL's first blackout policy. If a game wasn't sold out, it couldn't be shown on local television. The idea was simple: television would build the brand, but it would never replace the live gate. Fans had to pay to see the product in person, or else the business model would collapse. Critics called the rule draconian. Fans were furious. But the NFL held firm. And once again, the league revealed its true instinct. When faced with choice, it would always choose control. By the late 1950s, cracks in the system began to show. Local television rights were chaotic. Wealthier teams in big cities, like the New York Giants, raked in huge profits by selling their broadcasts independently. Smaller market franchises, meanwhile, struggled to survive. It was a dangerous imbalance, one that threatened to tear the league apart. Enter Pete Rozelle. In 1960, at just 33 years old, Rozelle was named NFL commissioner. He was young, charismatic, and, most importantly, he understood television not as a threat, but as an opportunity. Rozelle's genius lay in his vision of collective bargaining. Instead of allowing teams to negotiate individual TV deals, he proposed that the league sell its broadcast rights as a single package. The revenue would then be shared equally among all franchises. It was a revolutionary idea. On its face, it sounded almost socialist, spreading the wealth to ensure survival for every team. But in practice, it was something else entirely: a consolidation of power. With one move, Rozelle shifted control of the NFL's most valuable asset, its television rights, from individual franchises to the league office. The owners, after some resistance, agreed. And in 1961, the NFL signed a historic contract with CBS, bringing every game under a single national broadcast umbrella. The Supreme Court even weighed in, granting the NFL an exemption under antitrust law in the 1961 Sports Broadcasting Act. The ruling allowed the league to pool its rights and sell them collectively. No other American sports league had such an arrangement. It was, in essence, legalized monopoly. For fans, the change felt like a gift. No longer did television access depend on geography or local deals. Every Sunday, the NFL became a shared ritual. Viewers in New York could watch Green Bay. Fans in Dallas could follow Chicago. The nation, once divided into regional loyalties, began to unify under the shield of the NFL. But beneath the surface, something more subtle was happening. Television gave fans the illusion of choice: multiple games, multiple teams, endless narratives. Yet all of it flowed from a single source, carefully managed by the league office. What you saw, when you saw it, and how you saw it was no longer decided by local stations or independent owners. It was orchestrated by the NFL itself. This orchestration extended to the very structure of the broadcast. Rozelle understood that football's stop and start rhythm was perfect for television. Each play was a discrete unit of action, followed by a pause that could be filled with commentary or advertisements. Unlike baseball, which meandered without a clock, or basketball, which moved too quickly for commercial breaks, football was tailor-made for the screen. Networks quickly realized the profit potential. Advertising dollars poured in. A 30-second spot during NFL broadcasts became some of the most valuable real estate in American media. Television didn't just expand the NFL's reach, it transformed the game into an economic juggernaut. But with that transformation came deeper control. Television dictated kickoff times. It influenced scheduling, pushing marquee matchups into prime slots. It reshaped the calendar itself, introducing Monday Night Football in 1970, a spectacle designed to capture viewers when no other competition was on air. Each innovation reinforced the same principle. The NFL controlled the terms of engagement, and fans would adapt to its rhythm. Even the language of the game began to shift. Television announcers became the narrators of football, telling viewers not just what happened, but what it meant. The NFL, by aligning itself with networks, ensured that its story was told in its own voice. Dissent, controversy, or scandal could be minimized, reframed, or overshadowed by the spectacle of the broadcast. The illusion was powerful. To the average fan, television made the NFL feel more democratic, more accessible. Anyone, anywhere, could tune in and be part of the action. But in reality, choice was an illusion. The games you watched were the games the league wanted you to see. The storylines that reached your living room were the ones the league was willing to tell. This wasn't lost on players either. As television revenue exploded, owners gained leverage in labor disputes. Players began demanding a greater share of the profits, leading to strikes in the 1970s and 1980s. But even in those conflicts, television remained the NFL's trump card. With fans addicted to the broadcast product, the league held the upper hand in shaping public perception. Striking players were cast as greedy. Owners, shielded by the league's media apparatus, positioned themselves as protectors of the game. Television didn't just grow the NFL's audience, it deepened its ability to manipulate narratives. The blackout policy remained in place for decades, a reminder that the league could still restrict access when it suited its interests. And while fans fumed, they rarely abandoned the product. The spectacle was too powerful, the illusion too convincing. By the 1980s, the NFL was no longer just a sport. It was television's crown jewel, a cultural institution woven into the fabric of American life. Super Bowl Sunday became a national holiday. Halftime shows became global events. Commercials became as anticipated as the games themselves. What began as grainy broadcasts on the Dumont Network had evolved into the most valuable programming in American history. And yet, through all of it, one truth remained constant. The NFL's power came not from the choices it offered fans, but from the choices it withheld. The league had mastered the art of presenting restriction as abundance, of turning control into entertainment. Fans believed they were watching football unfold naturally, when in reality, they were watching a product carefully curated, timed, and delivered by the league office. Television was never just about bringing football into people's homes. It was about bringing people's homes under football's control. And once the NFL had that power, it never let go. The NFL's mastery of television gave it unprecedented wealth and power. But money has a way of sharpening contradictions. The same contracts that filled owners' pockets also exposed the imbalance between those who controlled the league and those who risked their bodies every Sunday. By the 1970s, the question could no longer be avoided. Who truly owned the game, the men in the boardrooms or the men on the field? Professional football had always carried a brutal truth. Careers were short, injuries were common. For most players, the window to earn a living was a handful of years. And yet, despite the billions flowing into the league by the late 1970s, players' salaries lagged far behind their value. Health benefits were limited. Pensions were meager. Contracts were not guaranteed. To play in the NFL meant surrendering not only your body, but often your future. That simmering discontent reached a breaking point in 1974, when the NFL faced its first modern players' strike. The issues were clear. Players wanted higher minimum salaries, better pensions, and more rights in free agency. The NFL Players Association, led by Executive Director Ed Garvey, believed the time had come to challenge the league's iron grip. The owners, however, had no intention of yielding. They framed the players as ungrateful, insisting that football was a privilege, not a right. And with television as their weapon, they shaped the narrative. Headlines echoed the owner's perspective. Announcers tied to league contracts often portrayed striking players as greedy and reckless. The message was simple. The players were the problem, not the system. The strike lasted only 2 months. Players, facing financial pressure, trickled back onto the field without securing major concessions. The league had won, but not through brute force alone. It had won through silencing dissent, minimizing sympathy, and ensuring that fans never truly heard the players' side of the story. But the conflict didn't end in 1974. The seeds of labor unrest continued to grow, watered by resentment and injustice. In 1982, the players struck again. This time, the demands centered on revenue sharing. Television contracts had ballooned into hundreds of millions, yet players still received only a fraction of the windfall. The NFLPA argued that athletes, as the ones creating the spectacle, deserved a direct share of broadcast revenue. The 1982 strike lasted 57 days and wiped out 7 weeks of the season. It was the longest work stoppage in NFL history at the time. Fans were angry, networks were frustrated, and once again, the league wielded the megaphone. Television commentary emphasized lost games, disappointed fans, and owners painted as victims. Rarely did broadcasts linger on the financial disparities or the human cost of playing without long-term security. Eventually, the strike ended with modest gains, higher minimum salaries, increased benefits, but far short of the structural changes players hoped for. The league had weathered another storm. But the pattern was becoming clear. Every time players tried to challenge the system, the NFL's control over narrative and perception blunted their leverage. Then came 1987, the most infamous labor dispute in NFL history. Once again, players walked out, demanding true free agency, the right to negotiate with other teams once their contracts expired. To the union, it was a matter of fairness. To the owners, it was an existential threat. If free agency became real, salaries would soar, and their dominance would weaken. This time, the NFL responded with a ruthless tactic: replacement players. For 3 weeks, the league fielded teams made up of semi-pros, cast-offs, and hopefuls who crossed the picket lines. The games were sloppy, the talent uneven, but the message was unmistakable. The NFL was willing to tarnish its product to preserve control. Television again played its part. Networks aired the games, often with little acknowledgement of the chaos behind the scenes. Commentators avoided dwelling on the absence of stars. Fans, deprived of their usual heroes, still tuned in. The league's gamble paid off. The strike crumbled. Players returned with almost nothing gained, their union fractured and weakened. For the NFL, it was a victory of devastating clarity. Not only had the league maintained control, it had demonstrated that even its stars were replaceable. The shield, not the player, was the true product. And with television's spotlight fixed firmly on the field, fans were encouraged to move on quickly, to forget the conflict and embrace the spectacle once again. But beneath the triumph lay scars. Many players never forgave the league for 1987. The strike exposed just how precarious their power truly was. They had the talent, the sweat, the risk, but the NFL had the narrative. And in a battle for hearts and minds, the league always held the advantage. As the 1990s approached, cracks began to widen in the NFL's labor dominance. Lawsuits mounted. Courts ruled in favor of players seeking free agency. Eventually, a landmark 1993 collective bargaining agreement introduced a salary cap and true free agency, a compromise that gave players higher salaries while ensuring the league's financial system remained orderly. Yet, even in compromise, the essence of control endured. Free agency came with restrictions. The salary cap preserved competitive balance, but it also capped player earnings. The NFL had given ground only when forced by law, and even then, it framed the outcome as a victory for parity, for the good of the game. Fans once again accepted the narrative. The lesson of these decades is chilling in its consistency. Each strike, each negotiation, revealed the same imbalance. The players had their voices, but the league had the microphone. The players bore the risks, but the league wrote the story. And in the end, silence was the price of survival. Some players paid that price without protest. Others carried bitterness long after their careers ended. Still others tried to warn fans to break through the carefully managed narrative. Linebacker Harry Carson, a Hall of Famer, once put it bluntly, "Players come and go. Owners stay forever." His words cut to the core of the NFL's reality. The league wasn't built to serve its labor force. It was built to outlast them. What strikes me most, looking back on those years, is not just the brutality of the battles, but the way they faded from public memory. Ask most fans today about 1974, 1982, or 1987, and you'll get blank stares. The games returned. The spectacle resumed. The silence held. That is the NFL's greatest triumph, not only its ability to crush resistance, but its ability to erase the evidence. And as the league entered the new millennium, a new front opened in its campaign for control. Labor disputes had exposed the NFL's dominance over its players. But another, even more dangerous challenge loomed on the horizon, one that threatened not just contracts and salaries, but the very bodies and minds of the men who played the game. The concussion crisis was coming. And when it did, the NFL would turn once again to its oldest weapon: the manipulation of truth. The human brain is the most delicate organ in the body. It floats, suspended in fluid, shielded by bone. Yet on every NFL Sunday, it is rattled, shaken, and bruised by collisions that no other profession would dare call routine. For decades, these hits were celebrated highlight reels of bone-crunching tackles. The sound of helmets colliding, the cheers of fans echoing as bodies crumpled to the ground. Violence wasn't incidental to football. It was part of its allure. But by the late 20th century, questions that had once been whispers grew too loud to ignore. What happened when the cheers faded? What happened to the men who had given their bodies, their futures, their very minds to the game? The NFL's answer for years was silence. And when silence was no longer possible, The answer became denial. The first cracks appeared in the 1990s. Former players began speaking publicly about memory loss, depression, and unexplained mood swings. The symptoms were consistent, eerily similar, and devastating. "It's like I'm losing pieces of myself," one former player told a reporter in 1997. He was in his 40s, but his brain function resembled that of a man decades older. Around the same time, researchers began publishing studies suggesting a link between repeated head trauma and long-term cognitive decline. The science was not yet conclusive, but the warning signs were unmistakable. For the NFL, these questions represented an existential threat. If football was proven to cause brain damage, the foundation of the league's empire reads entertainment value. Its youth pipeline, its cultural legitimacy would be shaken to its core. So the NFL did what powerful institutions often do when faced with inconvenient truths. It manufactured doubt. In 1994, then-Commissioner Paul Tagliabue announced the creation of the Mild Traumatic Brain Injury Committee. On the surface, it looked like a responsible step-a-legly initiative to study concussions and player safety. But the committee was not led by independent neuroscientists or unbiased experts. Instead, it was dominated by league-affiliated doctors, some with little to no background in brain science. Over the next decade, the committee published papers in peer-reviewed journals, repeatedly minimizing the risks of concussions. They argued that there was no proven long-term connection between repeated head injuries and cognitive decline. They claimed that players who suffered concussions could safely return to the field the same day. They downplayed or outright dismissed studies that suggested otherwise. It was a strategy ripped straight from another American industry: tobacco. When evidence mounted that smoking caused cancer, tobacco companies didn't try to disprove the science outright. They sowed confusion. They demanded more research. They framed the issue as unsettled, knowing that doubt was enough to preserve their profits. The NFL borrowed this playbook, weaponizing uncertainty to maintain control. But reality has a way of breaking through manufactured narratives. In 2002, a Nigerian-born pathologist named Dr. Bennett Omalu examined the brain of Mike Webster, the legendary Pittsburgh Steelers center known as Iron Mike. Webster had died at 50 after years of erratic behavior, homelessness, and mental decline. When Omalu studied his brain, he found a pattern of tau protein buildup consistent with a degenerative condition later named chronic traumatic encephalopathy (CTE). Omalu published his findings, and for the first time, the connection between football and brain damage had a name. His discovery should have sparked urgent reform. Instead, it sparked a campaign of dismissal. The NFL's Concussion Committee attacked Omalu's work, accusing him of flawed science. League doctors demanded retractions. Omalu was cast as an outsider, an alarmist. But the truth spread. More brains were studied. More cases of CTE were confirmed. Former players died young. Suicides, overdoses, unexplained declines, and autopsies revealed the same patterns of damage. The evidence grew undeniable. And yet, for years, the NFL clung to denial. League spokespeople insisted there was no definitive proof. Television broadcasts downplayed concussions as dings or getting your bell rung. Players were praised for toughness. When they returned to the field after staggering off, dazed and unsteady, the spectacle continued, the machine grinding forward, while the men who fueled it silently deteriorated. The cost was staggering. In 2012, Junior Seau, one of the greatest linebackers of his generation, took his own life at age 43. His brain, studied afterward, showed advanced CTE. His death sent shockwaves through the league, through locker rooms, through families of players past and present. So wasn't the first, but he was a symbol proof that even the most seemingly indestructible were not immune. Public pressure mounted. Lawsuits followed. Thousands of former players sued the league, alleging that the NFL had concealed the dangers of concussions for decades. In 2013, the league agreed to a landmark settlement, eventually worth over $1 billion to compensate former players suffering from neurological conditions. On paper, it looked like accountability. But critics argued that the settlement capped payouts excluded future claims and allowed the NFL to avoid admitting liability. Once again, control remained intact. For me, the most haunting aspect of this chapter, isn't just the denial lit, the deliberate cultivation of doubt. The NFL didn't simply underestimate the risks. It engineered a narrative that prioritized the product over the people. Every study dismissed, every press release spun, every broadcast sanitized was part of a system designed not to protect players, but to protect power. And fans, for years, played along. We cheered the hits. We replayed the collisions. We admired toughness, mistaking it for resilience, when in truth, it was often slow-motion destruction. The league's control wasn't only over information, it was over perception itself. Even today, with concussion protocols, independent neurologists, and increased awareness, the legacy of denial lingers. Parents debate whether to let their children play. Former players speak openly about struggles with depression, memory loss, and anger. The curtain has been pulled back, but the cost of decades of silence cannot be undone. The story of concussions is not just about science, it is about control. The NFL showed the world how a corporation can shape reality not by disproving inconvenient truths, but by burying them under layers of manufactured doubt. And in doing so, it revealed something fundamental about power. It doesn't need to erase the truth, it only needs to outlast it. As the league emerged from the concussion crisis with its empire intact, another arena of control was already unfolding. If it could manipulate science and labor, what about politics? What about the very laws that governed its existence? The NFL wasn't content to dominate the field or the screen. It wanted to shape the halls of power itself. Power in America is rarely confined to one arena. It bleeds, it spreads, it seeps into places unseen. For the National Football League, control over the field, over the locker room, over the broadcast was not enough. To protect its empire, the NFL had to reach beyond the stadium. It had to shape the very machinery of American politics, bending laws, regulations, and public policy to its will. At first glance, football seems far removed from Washington, D.C., a game of grit and spectacle, a pastime for millions. But follow the money, and the picture sharpens. The NFL is not just a sports league, it is a multi-billion-dollar corporation. And corporations survive not only by selling products, but by buying influence. The league's entry into politics was gradual, almost invisible. Tax exemptions, antitrust accommodations, sweetheart stadium deals, these were early signs of a strategy that would harden into a permanent playbook. The NFL discovered that its greatest asset wasn't just its brand or its players. It was its ability to move people, voters, taxpayers, and policymakers. Consider the league's long history with stadium subsidies. Across the United States, NFL owners pressured cities and states to fund massive new arenas, often with public money. The pitch was always the same: jobs, economic growth, civic pride. Local officials, eager to be seen as champions of their cities, bent under the pressure. Billions in taxpayer dollars flowed into gleaming stadiums, while the profits flowed upward to owners, franchises, and the league office. And when lawmakers or watchdogs pushed back, the NFL unleashed its most potent weapon: lobbying. By the 1990s, the league had built a permanent presence in Washington. Lobbyists courted lawmakers, campaign donations trickled into key committees, and the NFL positioned itself as not just entertainment, but a cultural institution too valuable to cross. Behind closed doors, officials were reminded of the league's reach, its millions of fans, its dominance on television, its role as a Sunday ritual in American life. The results were staggering. The NFL successfully maintained its exemption from federal antitrust laws, a carve-out that allowed owners to negotiate television contracts collectively and preserve their cartel-like structure. In 1961, Congress had passed the Sports Broadcasting Act, essentially giving the league permission to act as one when negotiating with networks. That exemption remained untouchable, no matter how much money the league grew to command. This wasn't just influence, it was insulation. In any other industry, collusion on this scale would have been illegal. For the NFL, it became business as usual, protected by law, shielded by lobbying, and the reach extended further. In 1966, when the NFL and AFL merged, Congress could have blocked the deal as monopolistic. Instead, under pressure and persuasion, lawmakers approved it. The result was the birth of the modern NFL One League, one empire, unchallenged. From that moment forward, football's dominance in American culture was not just organic, it was political. The NFL also learned the art of framing itself as indispensable to the American identity. Whenever lawmakers questioned its privileges, the league leaned on patriotism, tradition, and spectacle. Remember the post-9/11 era? The NFL wrapped itself in the flag, staging elaborate military flyovers and tributes, some of which were later revealed to be funded by the Department of Defense as part of paid patriotism campaigns. The message was clear. Questioning the NFL was just questioning a sport. It was questioning America itself. By the early 2000s, the league had perfected this balancing act. It spent millions on lobbying each year, quietly shaping tax policy, labor rules, and broadcasting regulations. But it rarely appeared confrontational. Instead, it moved like smoke present in every room, hard to grasp, impossible to contain. One of the most revealing battles came in 2015, when the NFL suddenly and voluntarily gave up its federal tax-exempt status. For decades, the league office had filed as a nonprofit trade association under Section 501c6 of the tax code. It was a strange technicality. The teams themselves were for-profit corporations, but the central office avoided paying millions in taxes each year. As public scrutiny mounted, lawmakers began asking questions. Facing growing outrage, the NFL made a strategic move. By abandoning the exemption, it silenced critics and kept its financial books more private. The money lost in taxes was a small price compared to the power preserved. Even in matters of criminal justice, the league's influence was felt. Consider the ongoing debates over gambling. For years, the NFL opposed legalized sports betting, warning it would threaten the integrity of the game. But when the Supreme Court overturned the federal ban in 2018, the league pivoted instantly. Suddenly, partnerships with sportsbooks became not just acceptable, but lucrative. Billions flowed in through official deals, advertising, and sponsorships. The about-face was not hypocrisy, was pragmatism. The NFL didn't oppose gambling. It opposed gambling it didn't control. And yet, the most profound demonstration of the NFL's political power wasn't in taxes or betting. It was in labor. Time and again, the league used its lobbying muscle to shape collective bargaining, tilt arbitration in favor of owners, and weaken the ability of players to challenge suspensions or disciplinary measures in court. In 2011, when the Players' Union faced off against the league in a lockout, the NFL turned to federal courts confident it could leverage its political and legal standing. It was right. The lockout ended with a deal tilted heavily toward ownership, securing billions in revenue while maintaining strict control over the workforce. For players, the message was clear. They could win small victories, but the system itself was rigged. The owners had Congress. They had the courts. They had the machinery of lobbying. Even the concussion crisis, which exploded into public consciousness in the 2000s, revealed the league's reach. As lawsuits mounted, the NFL didn't just fight in courtrooms. It lobbied Congress, seeking to minimize oversight, contain liability, and frame the issue as under control. Hearings were held, fiery statements were made, but in the end, the league walked away with its empire intact. It paid settlements, yes, but the structure of power never shifted. To watch the NFL in politics is to watch a masterclass in soft power. The league rarely bullies outright, doesn't need to. It wraps itself in culture, in identity, in Americana, until resistance feels impossible. Lawmakers know the risks of crossing the NFL: angry constituents, economic threats, the wrath of television contracts. So instead, they accommodate. And yet, beneath the polish, the pattern is unmistakable. The NFL behaves not like a sports league, but like a state unto itself, shewing its own rules, enforcing its own justice, bending national policy in its favor. It thrives not only on touchdowns and ticket sales, but on the quiet, invisible machinery of influence. The NFL above the law is not a metaphor. It is a reality carved into policy. It's preserved through lobbying and cemented in decades of legislative favors. But power rarely stays confined. Once the league learned to control politics, it turned to the broader culture itself, protest and identity. And in that arena, control would be tested in ways even the NFL could not fully contain. Control in the NFL has never been limited to stadium deals, television contracts, or courtroom victories. True power lies in shaping how the public perceives the game, its myths, its heroes, its meaning. And nowhere has that battle been more volatile, more divisive, and more revealing than in the realm of race and protest. The NFL, from its earliest days, was built on contradictions. On the field, black athletes became the league's defining stars: Jim Brown, Jerry Rice, Walter Payton, Lawrence Taylor, Emmitt Smith. Their brilliance fueled the spectacle, brought in television ratings, and defined eras. But off the field, control was wrested away from them at every turn. Decisions about contracts, discipline, and representation were made in boardrooms dominated by white owners. The imbalance was stark. Roughly 70% of players in the modern NFL are black. Yet for decades, ownership remained almost exclusively white. The image of the league as a meritocracy cracked under the weight of this reality. The men who risked their bodies and minds on Sundays had little say in the policies, rules, and politics that governed them. The tension deepened in 2016 when Colin Kaepernick, then a quarterback for the San Francisco 49ers, took a knee during the national anthem to protest police brutality and racial injustice. It was a gesture quiet in form, but seismic in impact. Overnight, football, the league's carefully curated cathedral of unity, became the stage for a national reckoning. For the NFL, it was the ultimate test of control. The league thrived on patriotism, on rituals of unity, on the illusion that football transcended politics. But Kaepernick's act shattered that illusion. The NFL's response revealed not just discomfort, but a concerted effort to seize the narrative. Publicly, league executives spoke of respecting free speech, of understanding the passions at play. Privately, owners fumed. Leaked reports confirmed what many suspected. Kaepernick was effectively blackballed, unsigned season after season, despite being more qualified than many quarterbacks still in the league. Owners feared backlash from sponsors, television partners, and politicians. And in 2017, when President Donald Trump publicly blasted protesting players, telling NFL owners to get that son of a bitch off the field, the league's resolve was tested like never before. Some owners initially stood by their players, linking arms in symbolic gestures of solidarity. But the league soon shifted toward damage control. It announced new rules for anthem conduct, pressured teams behind the scenes, and pushed for gestures it could control helmet decals, approved slogans, pre-packaged tributes rather than authentic protest. The NFL wanted to manage outrage, not embrace it. And yet, the harder the league tried to control the narrative, the more the cracks showed. Kaepernick became a global symbol of resistance, a reminder that the NFL's power had limits when confronted with larger forces of justice and protest. The league eventually reached a settlement with him in 2019, but the damage was done. Its claim to stand above politics was revealed as fiction. The struggle over race and protest was not new. It had echoes in the past. In the 1960s, black players had already begun challenging the league's structures. They organized boycotts, fought discriminatory treatment in hotels and restaurants, and resisted pressure to remain silent. Jim Brown, outspoken in his activism, once said, "Athletes are looked upon to perform and shut up. But I've never been that type." His defiance set a precedent that echoed decades later in Kaepernick's knee. The NFL's response across generations has followed a pattern. First denial, then suppression, then eventual caution. When protests threaten the image of unity, the league distances itself. When the momentum becomes too large to ignore, the NFL pivots, wrapping itself in the language of progress without conceding real power. After George Floyd's murder in 2020, the league issued sweeping statements condemning racism and pledging support for social justice. Commissioner Roger Goodell even released a video admitting the league had been wrong in how it handled player protests. But even then, the words rang hollow to many. Kaepernick remained unsigned. Owners rarely addressed systemic inequities in their own hiring practices. The league embraced slogans like "End racism in end zones," but the structural imbalance of power remained untouched. This duality celebrating black excellence on the field while constraining black voices often speaks to the NFL's deepest paradox. Control is not just financial or political. It is cultural. The league thrives on spectacle, but fears disruption. It profits from the labor of black athletes while resisting the empowerment of those same athletes as agents of change. And that resistance is not abstract. It shows up in hiring. Despite the creation of the Rooney Rule in 2003, which required teams to interview minority candidates for head coaching jobs, the results have been limited. Year after year, the number of black head coaches lags far behind the percentage of black players. General managers and ownership ranks are even more exclusive. Critics have argued that the Rooney Rule, once hailed as progress, has become a checkbox exercise in image of diversity without its reality. The NFL's control of narrative extends even to the language used. Players who protest are called distractions. Teams frame political expression as incompatible with football culture. The subtext is clear. Voices that challenge the league's curated image are threats to be managed, not truths to be embraced. But culture has a way of breaking through. When young fans wore Kaepernick jerseys in the streets, when athletes in other sports from basketball to soccer took knees in solidarity, the NFL's attempt to isolate and control the narrative faltered. The message could not be contained. Still, the league adapted. It invested in social justice initiatives, pledged donations, and worked with select players to present a unified front, but always on its terms, always in ways that preserved ownership's final authority. The NFL wanted to be seen as responsive, but never vulnerable. It wanted credit for change without surrendering control. The struggle over race and protest revealed the league's core instinct to maintain dominance over not just the game, but its meaning, to dictate not just how football is played, but what football stands for. And in this, the NFL showed the extent of its hidden power. It did not merely entertain. It sought to shape the very conversation about justice, patriotism, and identity in America. But control has limits. The more the NFL tried to suppress protest, the more it revealed its own anxieties. The more it curated symbolic gestures, the more fans and players noticed the gap between image and reality. The struggle for narrative was not only about race, it was about truth itself, who gets to tell it, and who gets silenced. And yet, even as protests tested the league's grip, another battlefield loomed, one that would expose how fragile control could be when confronted with the vast and unpredictable force of media. Because while the NFL had mastered politics and culture, the rise of new platforms, new voices, and new technologies threatened to rewrite the script entirely. Power does not survive in silence. It survives in story. For the NFL, the ability to control not only what happens on the field, but how that story is told has been one of its most enduring sources of influence. The league has never merely played the game, has owned the narrative around it. And in that control lies its greatest hidden weapon. From the very beginning, football's rise was tethered to media. The NFL's partnership with television in the 1950s and 1960s turned a regional pastime into a national obsession. The 1958 NFL Championship game, the so-called greatest game ever played, wasn't just a thrilling overtime contest. It was broadcast into living rooms across the country, igniting a love affair between football and television that would define both industries for generations. The NFL understood early. It was not simply in the business of sport. It was in the business of broadcast. As the decades unfolded, the league tightened its grip. Unlike baseball or basketball, the NFL embraced centralization. With the Sports Broadcasting Act of 1961, it secured the legal right to negotiate national television contracts as a collective. This was not just a financial windfall, it was a storytelling monopoly. By consolidating power over broadcasts, the league could dictate when games were played, how they were presented, and which narratives dominated the airwaves. Television, in turn, became the league's most loyal partner. Networks poured billions into contracts, knowing football guaranteed massive ratings. Sunday afternoons became ritual. Monday nights became spectacle. And in each broadcast, the NFL's hand was unmistakable. Pre-game shows hyped league-approved narratives. Announcers leaned into storylines that elevated the league's drama. Controversies that threatened the brand were downplayed, while triumphs were amplified to mythic proportions. The NFL's control over media wasn't just about access, it was about framing. Consider how injuries were discussed in the 1970s and 1980s. Announcers spoke of players shaking it off, or playing through the pain, reinforcing a culture of toughness while masking the long-term consequences. Concussions were dings. Torn ligaments were setbacks. The language sanitized violence, selling resilience while burying risk. For decades, this narrative machine kept fans enthralled and critical questions at bay. But as media evolved, so did the NFL's tactics. By the 1990s and 2000s, the league had become a master of image management. It cultivated official partnerships with ESPN, Fox, CBS, and NBC, ensuring coverage remained favorable. When controversies erupted from player strikes to ownership scandals, networks often pulled punches, wary of jeopardizing billion-dollar deals. Critics argued that sports journalism itself became compromised, trapped in a relationship where access was currency and truth a liability. The league's influence extended even to the timing of broadcasts. The introduction of flex scheduling allowed the NFL to move marquee matchups into primetime slots, ensuring maximum ratings. Games were not just contests. They were content, packaged and optimized for narrative impact. The league controlled the spotlight, deciding which teams and players America would see. And, by extension, which stories America would believe. Then came the digital age. Social media, streaming platforms, and independent voices shattered the old monopolies. Suddenly, the NFL could not control every camera, every commentator, every angle. Players found their own platforms, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, where they could speak directly to fans, bypassing the league's filters. A single post could spark a controversy, unravel a carefully curated storyline, or expose truths the league preferred hidden. For the NFL, this was both a threat and an opportunity. On one hand, it lost absolute control. On the other, it adapted with stunning speed. The league launched its own media arms on FL Network, NFL.com, NFL Films 2.0, designed not only to deliver content, but to dominate the conversation. By producing its own documentaries, highlight reels, and analysis shows, the NFL blurred the line between journalism and marketing. What looked like reporting was often storytelling with an agenda. Take NFL Films, once celebrated as the gold standard of sports documentary. The iconic voice of John Facenda. The slow-motion shots of snow swirling around battered players. The orchestral scores, these built mythology. They turned football into something larger than sport, something almost sacred. But mythology is not truth. NFL films elevated the game, but often erased its shadows. Pain, scandal, exploitation, these rarely made the final cut. In crafting legend, the league also controlled memory. Even scandals like Deflategate or Spygate revealed how narrative control worked. Coverage swirled with drama, endless debates about integrity and punishment. But the NFL itself steered the conversation, leaking information selectively, timing announcements for maximum impact, and ensuring the focus stayed on individuals rather than systemic flaws. The league was never merely reacting, it was scripting. And yet, cracks continued to form. Independent journalists, podcasts, and documentaries outside the NFL's reach began telling different stories. The concussion crisis, long downplayed in official narratives, exploded only after investigative journalists and outside filmmakers forced the issue. In 2013, the PBS documentary League of Denial exposed decades of NFL obfuscation around brain injuries. The league, caught off guard, tried to discredit the reporting, but the story could not be contained. For once, the NFL lost control of the narrative. This loss was not total. Even in crisis, the league managed to pivot. It introduced concussion protocols, partnered with scientists, and launched safety campaigns. It framed itself not as villain, but reformer. The shift was strategic. Control the future story, even if you lose the present one. The NFL's relationship with media reflects a deeper truth about power. Those who shape the story shape reality. When fans think of football, they don't just recall scores or stats. They recall narratives, dynasties like the Patriots, rivalries like Packers-Bears, icons like Tom Brady or Joe Montana. These narratives are not organic. They are cultivated, reinforced, and amplified by the league's information machine. But as powerful as this machine remains, it is no longer unchallenged. Independent platforms continue to grow. Players have louder voices than ever before. Social issues intersect with sports in ways the league cannot fully script. The NFL still controls much, but it no longer controls everything. The struggle for narrative is now a contested field, where the league's polished productions compete with raw truths broadcast by players, journalists, and fans alike. And in that contested field lies the future of power. Because if narrative is control, then losing narrative means losing grip. The NFL knows this. That is why it invests so heavily in media dominance, why it guards its image with ferocity, why it spins controversy into spectacle. For the league, the story is the empire. Without it, the empire cracks. Yet, narrative control is not limited to what the public sees on television or reads online. It extends into the most intimate, vulnerable spaces of the game itself, into the bodies and lives of the players who make football possible. Because beyond the media machine lies a quieter, starker form of control. The way the league governs health, safety, and sacrifice. And it is there, in the hidden costs of the sport, where the NFL's power is felt most brutally. The NFL sells an illusion of invincibility. On Sundays, players look like titans, armored in gleaming helmets, sprinting, colliding, leaping into the air as if immune to gravity or pain. The broadcast packages it all like myth. The swelling music, the close-ups of sweat dripping in slow motion, the warrior imagery. But behind that spectacle lies a truth the league spent decades trying to bury. Football is not just entertainment, it's destruction. The hidden cost of control is the health of the very men who give the league its glory. And for years, the NFL treated those men as expendable. It begins with denial. In the 1970s, players were tougher than steel ore, so the story went. Concussions. They weren't called concussions. They were dings. Bell ringers, moments where you shook your head, cleared your vision, and went back in. Coaches glorified it. Teammates cheered it. The league ignored it. If a player staggered back onto the field, the broadcast booth praised his grit. The suffering was turned into a highlight. But by the 1980s and 90s, cracks appeared in the facade. Former players were collapsing into dementia in their 40s. Others spiraled into depression, violence, or suicide. The stories began piling up. Mike Webster, the Hall of Fame center for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Once known as Iron Mike, reduced to living out of his truck, unable to recognize his own family. He became a ghost long before his death at 50. The NFL had a choice: confront the growing evidence that its game was destroying lives or protect the shield. It chose protection. In 1994, under mounting questions, the NFL formed the Mild Traumatic Brain Injury Committee. On paper, it looked like responsibility. In reality, it was misdirection. The committee wasn't composed of independent neurologists. It was packed with NFL insiders, team doctors, league employees, men whose paychecks depended on maintaining the illusion that football was safe. For over a decade, they published paper after paper in obscure medical journals, all echoing the same refrain: no proven link between football and long-term brain damage. They dismissed outside research, ridiculed scientists who raised alarms, and reassured players and fans that the game posed no greater risk than any other contact sport. It was a strategy of control, pure and simple. Control the science, control the narrative. But the truth doesn't stay buried forever. Enter Dr. Bennett Omalu, a Nigerian-born neuropathologist working in Pittsburgh. In 2002, he performed an autopsy on Mike Webster. What he found shocked him. Webster's brain was scarred with tau protein deposits, damage identical to what boxers had suffered for decades, known as chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE. Omalu published his findings. The NFL went on the attack. They dismissed him as an outsider who didn't understand football, pressured journals to retract his work, and painted him as alarmist. But Omalu's research ignited something the NFL could no longer contain. Independent scientists began looking at other deceased players. The results were devastating. One after another, autopsies revealed the same pattern: young men, former athletes, with brains that looked like those of elderly Alzheimer's patients. The NFL's denial campaign began to crack. By the late 2000s, the evidence had become undeniable. The league's concussion policies were laughably outdated. Players were allowed back on the field in the same game after a head injury, sometimes in the same drive. The public began to see the NFL's warrior culture for what it was. Exploitation and lawsuits started piling up. Thousands of former players sued the league, accusing it of deliberately hiding the dangers of head trauma. For a league built on control, this was existential. The lawsuits threatened billions. Worse, they threatened to change the way fans perceived the sport. Because if parents stopped letting their kids play football, the NFL's pipeline of talent would dry up. Control the narrative, and you control the future. Lose it, and the empire collapses. So the NFL pivoted. They rebranded themselves as leaders in safety. They introduced new concussion protocols, hired independent sideline doctors, and launched flashy PR campaigns about player health. They poured millions into helmet research, youth programs, and television spots, assuring parents that football was safer than ever. But behind the curtain, the story was more complicated. The concussion settlement, which the league agreed to in 2013, promised nearly $1 billion in compensation for former players. Yet the fine print revealed its true intent: to cap liability, not to deliver justice. Many claims were denied. The system was designed with loopholes so tight that countless families of stricken players found themselves shut out, control, even in restitution. And the issue goes deeper than concussions. The NFL's power has long been about how much pain it can normalize. From shredded knees to broken backs, from painkiller abuse to steroid cover-ups, the league's strategy has always been the same: keep the machine running. Players talk about the Toradol culture, the injections given like candy before games, numbing bodies so they can survive the collisions. Former stars have testified about being handed bags of pills with little explanation, just a directive. Take this, play through it. Many retired players ended up addicted, their bodies wrecked before they turned 40. The league denied, deflected, delayed. Then, when lawsuits threatened exposure, they settled. Always settling not to admit guilt, but to preserve power. The hidden cost of this control is visible in the obituaries. Junior Seau, one of the greatest linebackers in NFL history, shot himself in the chest at 43 so that scientists could study his brain. Dave Durson, another Pro Bowler, did the same. Countless others died younger than they should have. Their families left with questions and grief. Their legacies reduced to cautionary tales. And yet, Sunday rolls around, and the machine keeps humming. Because the NFL has mastered something chilling, the art of making pain part of the brand. They package violence as entertainment, suffering as sacrifice, destruction as destiny. Fans don't stop watching. Ratings soar, revenue climbs. The machine survives because Control isn't just about silencing scientists or settling lawsuits, it's about shaping perception. If the story of football is one of glory, courage, and honor, then the pain becomes acceptable, even noble. The league now touts its concussion spotters and independent doctors as proof of reform. But the reality remains. Football is inherently violent. No helmet can stop the brain from slamming against the skull. No protocol can erase the long-term damage of 1,000 hits. The NFL knows this. But it also knows something else. As long as it controls the narrative, it controls the game. The players may be the ones bleeding, staggering, breaking. But the league keeps cashing in. This is the hidden cost of power, the commodification of human health. The NFL has mastered the art of profiting off destruction, while convincing the public it is doing everything possible to protect its players. It's not protection. It's preservation of the brand, of the revenue, of the control. And the price is measured in bodies. The NFL's grip over health and safety reveals a brutal truth. Nothing threatens its control more than exposure. But power, once challenged, adapts. And so the league turned its gaze outward beyond the locker room, beyond the lawsuit to the airwaves themselves. Because if you can command the screen, you can command perception. If there is one invention that transformed football from a regional pastime into a cultural empire, it wasn't the forward pass or the Super Bowl, or even the expansion into new cities. It was the camera. The television lens did more than capture the game, redefined it, repackaged it, and delivered it into millions of living rooms. And with it came the greatest weapon the NFL has ever wielded: broadcasting control. Because if you can command the screen, you can command the nation. The story begins in the 1950s, when television itself was still young. Before then, football was a live spectacle, something you had to see in person. Stadiums mattered more than screens. Teams lived or died by their local gate receipts. The NFL, still fighting for legitimacy, looked at television warily. To some owners, it felt like cannibalism. Why would fans buy tickets if they could watch from their couches? But visionaries like Commissioner Bert Bell saw the opposite. Television wasn't a threat, it was a multiplier. In 1951, the NFL struck a modest deal to televise its championship game. It drew national attention. Suddenly, people who had never set foot in a stadium were glued to a screen, watching the sport in real time. Something powerful had been born. By the 1960s, under Pete Rozelle, that power crystallized. Rozelle understood that football wasn't just a sport, it was a television product. The rhythm of the game, the breaks between plays, the bursts of violence followed by stillness, it all fit perfectly into the medium. Unlike baseball, where long pauses tested patience, or basketball, where the action was too constant for commercials, football gave television exactly what it wanted: natural pauses for advertising. Rozelle moved quickly. He centralized television rights under the league office, wresting them away from individual teams. Then, in a groundbreaking move, he negotiated massive collective contracts with CBS, NBC, and later ABC. Instead of teams cutting their own deals, the NFL became a single seller of rights, a monopoly broker. The revenue was split evenly among franchises, creating financial parity that helped stabilize the league and fuel its growth. But the real genius wasn't just money, was control. By owning the relationship with networks, the NFL dictated how the game was presented. The broadcasts weren't neutral coverage. They were curated, polished, crafted into theater. From the very beginning, television networks were instructed to follow a script. Camera angles highlighted drama. Replay slowed down the violence, transforming collisions into cinematic moments. Announcers weren't independent journalists. They were carefully selected partners. Their job wasn't to question the league, but to reinforce its mythology. They told stories of toughness, of sacrifice, of glory. They called the league the Shield. They framed controversies as distractions, not systemic issues. What fans saw on screen was never raw reality. It was a narrative designed in New York and Los Angeles, filtered through legal-approved lenses. This control deepened in 1970, when the AFL-NFL merger gave birth to Monday Night Football. The league partnered with ABC to create not just a game, but a spectacle, a primetime event with celebrity guests, halftime shows, and larger-than-life commentary. Howard Cosell's dramatic narrations, Don Meredith's cowboy charm, and the spectacle of football under the lights turned the NFL into appointment viewing. By the 1980s, the NFL wasn't just America's pastime, it was America's television ritual. Sundays became sacred. Monday nights became iconic. And every broadcast was another layer of control, shaping how fans experienced the game, shaping how they thought about it. But control of broadcasting isn't just about presentation, it's about access. The NFL has long restricted its product with an iron grip. The infamous blackout rule, in effect for decades, banned local games from television if the stadium didn't sell out. On the surface, it was about ticket sales. In truth, it was about leverage. The blackout rule weaponized scarcity. It reminded fans that the league controlled not just the product, but their ability to consume it. Want to see your team? Buy a ticket. Otherwise, sit in silence. This wasn't unique to fans. Journalists, too, learned the rules of access. Step out of line, criticize the league too harshly, raise uncomfortable questions, and credentials could vanish. Entire careers depended on staying within the boundaries of league-approved discourse. Control, always through the camera. As the decades rolled on, the NFL became television's crown jewel. The Super Bowl turned into the most-watched broadcast in America, year after year. Networks didn't just pay for games, they built their programming around them. Fox built its brand on NFL rights in the 1990s. ESPN became a powerhouse on the back of Monday Night Football. Even CBS, once hesitant, restructured itself around the NFL's gravitational pull. And with each contract renewal, the money grew. Billions flowed from networks to the league, then from the league to teams. Then from teams to players, though never equally, never without strings. Television revenue became the lifeblood of the NFL, and with it, control tightened further. Because here's the unspoken truth. When you rely on the NFL for billions in content, you don't bite the hand that feeds you. Networks learned that lesson quickly. Consider how scandals are covered on air. Rarely do you hear a broadcaster on CBS or Fox openly criticize the league's leadership. Commentators don't dwell on concussion lawsuits during games. They don't linger on labor disputes, racial controversies, or domestic violence cases unless forced to. The coverage is curated, sanitized. Viewers tune in for the spectacle, and the league ensures that's all they get. Even when controversies break through like Deflategate or the anthem protests, the coverage is managed with care. The networks don't dictate the framing. the league does. Angles, commentary, graphics, they're all coordinated to minimize damage, to steer perception, to preserve the brand. And because ratings are so high, because advertising dollars are so immense, no network dares to rebel. The NFL isn't just a partner, it's a master. The digital era only deepened this monopoly. As cable gave way to streaming, the NFL adjusted seamlessly. Deals with Amazon, YouTube, and ESPN Plus ensured that the league stayed not just relevant, but dominant. The NFL Network, launched in 2003, gave the league its own 24-hour propaganda arm, pumping out content designed to reinforce its mythology. The Red Zone channel turned Sundays into a 7-hour advertisement for chaos, keeping fans glued, keeping them hooked. The NFL didn't just adapt to television, it bent the medium to its will. And yet, this control comes with a paradox. For all the dominance of broadcasting, for all the billions it generates, the NFL remains obsessed with secrecy. Broadcast partners may show the spectacle, but they rarely show the cost. Cameras don't linger on a player lying motionless after a hit. They cut to commercial. They don't dwell on empty stadiums when fans protest. They pan to cheering crowds. They don't spotlight the billionaire owners in their glass suites. They frame the game as player versus player, team versus team, not corporation versus humanity. That is the true power of broadcasting control, the ability not just to show, but to hide. In this way, the NFL has achieved something few other institutions in America ever have. It turned the camera, the most democratic of inventions, into an instrument of monopoly. Fans think they're watching the game. In reality, they're watching the league's curated version of it. Every angle, every highlight, every dramatic replays, all filtered, approved, controlled. The NFL isn't just in the business of sports, it's in the business of perception. And television is the battlefield where perception is won. But if television gave the NFL control of perception, there remained another battlefield, one far more volatile, unpredictable, and uncontrollable: labor codes. When players demand a share of the power, when workers challenge the empire, the shield doesn't shine so easily. Control has always been the league's obsession. But there is one force the NFL has never been able to fully contain: the players themselves. For all the billion-dollar contracts, the high-gloss broadcasts, and the mythology of the shield, football remains a game played by men who risk their bodies every Sunday. Without them, there is no empire. And so, for decades, the NFL has fought a quieter war, waged not on the field, but at the bargaining table, in courtrooms, and in locker rooms. It is the labor war, and it reveals as much about the league's hidden power as anything else. The story begins in the shadows of the 1950s and 60s. Back then, players were not superstars. They were workers poorly paid, poorly protected, and utterly expendable. Contracts were one-year deals. Benefits were minimal. If you got hurt, you were often cut. If you spoke up, you were blacklisted. The league held all the cards, and the players had no union strong enough to challenge it. But whispers of resistance began to spread. In 1956, the first Players Association was formed, led by men like Cleveland Browns lineman Don Shula and Detroit Lions guard Lou Creekmur. They asked for basics, minimum salaries, better equipment, a pension plan. For years, the league stonewalled them. Only when the threat of lawsuits loomed did the owners concede modest gains. It was a pattern that would repeat again and again. The league holding power, players forced to claw back scraps through relentless struggle. By the 1970s, the stakes rose. The merger of the AFL and NFL had created a single unified league. With that came even more control from the top, but also more leverage for the players. Free agency, the holy grail of labor rights, became the central battlefield. Under the Rizal rule, teams could demand compensation for losing a free agent, effectively locking players to their franchises for life. It was indentured servitude dressed up as contract law. The players fought back in court. In 1976, running back John Mackey, former president of the NFLPA, lent his name to a landmark antitrust suit. It challenged the Rozelle rule and eventually paved the way for greater mobility. The court sided with the players, but every victory came at a cost. Careers ended while lawsuits dragged on. The league retaliated with suspensions, with smear campaigns, with silence in the press. The 1980s brought open warfare. Twice that decade, players went on strike, first in 1982. Then, in 1987, the demands were clear: fair pay, better pensions, true free agency. Both strikes exposed the league's ruthlessness. Owners prepared for them, stockpiling cash, leveraging television contracts, and even recruiting replacement players during the 1987 strike. Games were played with scabs, stadiums half-filled. The quality embarrassing, but the message was unmistakable. The NFL would rather tarnish its product than bend to labor. Players, divided and fearful of losing their short careers, cracked under the pressure. The strikes ended with partial gains, but not full victories. For many, the scars never healed. Hall of Famer Joe DeLaMeller once said, "We were the product, but we had no power. They made us fight for every dime." Still, the pressure mounted. The late 80s and early 90s saw a series of lawsuits. McNeil v. NFL. Freeman McNeil's case, challenging the league's free agency restrictions, ultimately struck down the system. In 1993, the owners finally agreed to genuine free agency, tied to a salary cap. It was a watershed moment. For the first time, players could negotiate openly, move between teams, and demand market value. But here is the paradox. Every gain in player power has been counterbalanced by new forms of league control. The salary cap, while creating parity, also capped what players could earn collectively. Rookie wage scales limited new talent. Franchise tags bound stars to teams even when they reached free agency. Each concession carried hidden chains. The NFL's strategy has always been consistent. Concede just enough to maintain peace, but never so much that true equality emerges. The league keeps its players divided: veterans against rookies, stars against backups, offense against defense. Every collective bargaining agreement is laced with trade-offs, ensuring that unity is fragile. And then there is the most brutal reality. Careers are short. The average NFL career lasts less than 4 years. That means most players don't have the luxury of fighting for long-term rights. They want money now, not in a decade. The league knows this. It exploits it. Owners can wait out strikes. Players cannot. Time is the NFL's greatest weapon. Even in recent decades, as contracts ballooned and the league's profits soared, the labor war never stopped. In 2011, the owners locked out the players, canceling off-season activities and threatening the season itself. Billionaires versus millionaires, the media called it. But the framing was false. At stake were issues of safety, healthcare, and long-term security for men who sacrificed their bodies for the game. The lockout ended with another compromise: expanded revenue sharing, some safety concessions, but also extended seasons and heavier workloads. Once again, the shield emerged stronger. This is the hidden truth about labor in the NFL. The players may be the product, but they are not the power. Every gain is partial, every victory tempered, every strike answered with retaliation. And yet, the fight never ends. Consider Colin Kaepernick. His protest in 2016 was not a labor dispute in the traditional sense, but it was a labor issue in the truest sense. A worker challenging the system, speaking out against injustice, and paying with his career. Kaepernick's exile revealed that player power is conditional, tolerated only so long as it does not challenge the league's authority or brand. Today, the NFLPA is stronger than ever before, but the imbalance remains. The league still dictates schedules, medical standards, and disciplinary systems with near-absolute authority. Commissioner Roger Goodell acts as judge, jury, and executioner in conduct cases. Appeals go through him. The structure is designed to remind players who truly holds power. And so, the labor wars continue. They are quieter now, fought in boardrooms instead of picket lines, but they remain battles of survival. Players fight for longer careers, better healthcare, recognition of concussion trauma. The league fights to limit liability, to maximize profit, to preserve the image of control. The irony is stark. The NFL's greatness is built on the labor of men it constantly seeks to control. Every touchdown, every highlight, every Sunday spectacle is powered by their sacrifice. Yet, behind closed doors, they remain workers in a system designed to favor the billionaire class. In the end, the labor wars tell us something profound about the NFL's hidden power. The league doesn't just control the game, controls the very people who play it. It bends their careers, their health, even their voices, to its will. And when those voices rise too loudly, the league finds ways to silence them. That is the essence of control, not in the stadiums, not on the broadcasts, but in the bargaining power of men who give everything to the game, only to find that the game gives little back. But the NFL's grip doesn't stop with its players. Beyond the field, beyond the contracts and courtrooms, there is another arena where power is consolidated, one that affects fans, taxpayers, and entire cities. It is the battle over stadiums, and it reveals how the league learned to turn civic pride into profit. If you want to understand the true scope of the NFL's hidden power, you don't start on the field. You start with the concrete, the steel, and the billions poured into the coliseums we call stadiums. These are not just places to play games. They are symbols of civic pride, financial leverage, and political manipulation. For decades, the NFL has mastered the art of turning communities into investors, taxpayers into financiers, and cities into bargaining chips. Stadiums are the ultimate weapon, monuments built on the illusion of partnership, but in reality, fortresses of control. The story begins in the post-war years, when professional football began to grow beyond its regional roots. Early stadiums were often multi-purpose facilities shared with baseball teams or civic events. But as the NFL's popularity exploded, the league realized the value of controlling its own spaces. A football-only stadium wasn't just a venue, was a money machine. Parking, concessions, luxury boxes all became new revenue streams, and with revenue came leverage. Owners quickly learned they didn't have to pay for these palaces themselves. Cities, desperate for prestige, were willing to foot the bill. They were told that a team brought jobs, tourism, and national recognition. Civic leaders bought into the pitch. Taxpayers were told it was an investment in identity. But the returns rarely matched the promises. Studies across decades have shown that stadiums generate far less economic impact than advertised. The jobs are temporary. The tourism is marginal. The profits flow primarily to the teams, not the cities. Yet the myth persists because the NFL has perfected the sales pitch. The leverage is always the same. Relocation. Owners know the emotional weight of a team. They know what it means for a city to lose its colors, its mascots, its identity. And so, they dangle the threat like a sword. Build us a new stadium, or we'll leave. Pay for the upgrades, or we'll move. Civic pride becomes a bargaining chip, wielded by billionaires against taxpayers. The history of the league is filled with these stories. In 1984, the Baltimore Colts packed their bags in the middle of the night, moving to Indianapolis after city leaders refused to build a new stadium. The images of Mayflower moving trucks pulling away from Memorial Stadium remain seared into the city's memory, of betrayal captured in real time. The message was clear. Loyalty flows one way, upward. In the 1990s, Art Modell moved the Cleveland Browns to Baltimore under similar circumstances. Cleveland had poured heart and soul into its team, but when negotiations over a new facility soured, the franchise was gone. The city was left with scars, lawsuits, and decades of bitterness. Fans rioted, government scrambled, but the truth was undeniable. In the battle of stadiums, the NFL always wins. Modern examples show the game hasn't changed. Only the numbers have. Billion-dollar stadiums now rise across the landscape, often funded by taxpayer subsidies. In Los Angeles, the Rams' return was built on a $5 billion palace in Inglewood, financed through creative public-private structures that still shifted risk onto the community. In Las Vegas, the Raiders' move was greased by $750 million in public funds. Politicians sold it as an economic boom. The reality is, debt, obligations, and profit streams that flow almost exclusively to ownership. And each time, the league plays the same tune. Dangle the dream, whisper the threat, then walk away with the leverage. The cruelty lies in the intimacy of the relationship between teams and cities. Sports teams aren't like factories or corporate offices. They are cultural anchors, woven into the fabric of identity. When the Packers win, Green Bay celebrates. When the Steelers triumph, Pittsburgh feels vindicated. That bond gives owners extraordinary leverage. They don't have to argue economics, they argue belonging. Fans internalize it, politicians bow to it, and cities again and again pay for it. Stadium debt lingers for decades. Taxpayers fund projects long after the team has moved or the facility has aged. Public schools struggle, infrastructure crumbles, but new stadiums gleam under the lights, monuments to a deal that was never truly equitable. The NFL presents these stadiums as temples of unity. They show ribbon cuttings, parades, wide shots of crowds chanting together. But behind the spectacle lies a ledger. Each luxury suite is sold to corporations for 6 or 7 figures. Each naming rights deal funnels millions to ownership. Concessions, merchandise, parking, all controlled by the team. The public's role is simply to finance the upfront cost, then sit in the cheap seats. The power dynamic is stark. Cities compete against one another like desperate suitors, each offering richer incentives to attract or retain a team. The NFL doesn't just exploit this dynamic, it orchestrates it. Expansion and relocation become weapons. Los Angeles, without a team for 2 decades, was used as leverage repeatedly. Anytime an owner wanted a better stadium deal in their city, they hinted at moving to LA. The threat alone forced governments to bend. Critics have long called this what it is: corporate extortion dressed as civic partnership. But the NFL has mastered the optics. Press conferences focus on jobs and opportunity. Commissioners speak of community and tradition. Owners pose with mayors, cutting ribbons and promising legacy. What's rarely mentioned is the decades of debt and the funneling of wealth upward. And yet, fans cheer. Cities celebrate. The emotional power of football overrides the economic reality. That is the hidden genius of the league. It turns loyalty into leverage, passion into profit. Consider the case of St. Louis. After losing the Cardinals in 1988, the city invested heavily to lure the Rams from Los Angeles. They built the Edward Jones Dome with public financing, promising a new era of prosperity. For a time, it worked. The Rams delivered a Super Bowl and the greatest show on turf. But by the 2010s, the stadium was outdated by league standards. The Rams demanded upgrades. The city hesitated. And the team bolted ironically back to Los Angeles. St. Louis was left with debt payments on an empty stadium and the bitter knowledge that their loyalty had been transactional all along. This is the essence of NFL power in the realm of stadiums. It isn't just about football, it's about extraction. Billionaire owners privatize profits while socializing costs. Cities compete for teams as if they are lifelines, when in reality, they are profit engines for private entities. And fans, caught in the middle, are told it's about pride. The league's ability to control this narrative is extraordinary. Journalists who dig too deeply are drowned out by civic celebrations. Critics are framed as cynics, enemies of community spirit. And so, the cycle continues, but cracks are forming. More citizens question the deals. More economists publish studies exposing the myth of stadium economics. Lawsuits, like the one St. Louis filed against the NFL over the Rams' relocation, challenge the narrative. Yet, even in defeat, the league finds a way to profit. Settlements are paid, cities move on, and somewhere else, another stadium rises with another promise. The NFL has mastered many forms of control over players, over broadcasts, over rules. But perhaps none is more insidious than its control over cities themselves. Because here, the victims aren't just athletes risking their bodies. They are ordinary taxpayers, families who never set foot inside a luxury suite, but who pay the bill every April. Stadiums are sold as homes for communities. In truth, they are monuments to leverage. If stadiums reveal how the NFL manipulates cities, then the next battlefield shows how it manipulates knowledge itself. Because beyond the steel and concrete lies another form of control information. And nowhere has that been more devastating than in the league's handling of concussions. The sound of a collision in football is unlike anything else in sports. It isn't just pads slamming together or helmets rattling. It's the sound of two bodies colliding at unnatural speeds, powered by years of training, adrenaline, and desperation. On television, it comes across as a moment of excitement, a symbol of toughness. But on the field, players often describe it differently. They say it feels like their brain sloshes inside their skull. They talk about moments where the world goes white, where the body keeps moving, but the mind flickers. For decades, these moments were brushed aside, minimized, even mocked. They were called getting your bell rung. But in reality, they were concussions, mild traumatic brain injuries that the league knew far more about than it ever admitted. The story of concussions in the NFL is not simply one of medical oversight. It is one of systematic silence, a silence designed to protect the shield. Beginning in the 1990s, as evidence began mounting that repeated head trauma could lead to long-term neurological disease, the NFL responded not with urgency, but with denial. The creation of the Mild Traumatic Brain Injury Committee in 1994, chaired by a rheumatologist with no background in neurology, sent a message. The league would control the science and therefore control the narrative. Instead of welcoming outside experts, the NFL built its own apparatus, one that consistently downplayed the risks. Players knew something was wrong long before the science was undeniable. Former Jets wide receiver Al Toon retired after a string of concussions left him with chronic headaches and sensitivity to light. Quarterback Troy Aikman openly admitted he had no memory of winning the 1994 NFC Championship game after suffering a concussion during it. Yet for every story like theirs, countless others stayed hidden. Players feared losing their jobs. Coaches pressured them to return. Team doctors often worked in the gray area between medical ethics and organizational loyalty. And the fans, conditioned to celebrate toughness, rarely saw the invisible injuries as anything more than part of the game. But the truth has a way of surfacing. In 2002, the death of Pittsburgh Steelers center Mike Webster shattered the silence. Once an All-Pro, Webster died at 50, his body broken, his mind ravaged by dementia. Dr. Bennett Omalu, a forensic pathologist in Pittsburgh, examined his brain and found something shocking: chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE. It was a degenerative disease caused by repeated head trauma, something once thought to exist only in boxers. Omalu's findings, published in a peer-reviewed journal, should have sparked immediate reform. Instead, the NFL attacked him. League-affiliated doctors dismissed his work, pressured journals to retract his studies, and painted him as an outsider seeking attention. This denial stretched into the 2000s, even as case after case emerged. Former players were found suffering from memory loss, depression, and erratic behavior. Some, like former Chicago Bears safety Dave Durson, took their own lives, leaving notes requesting that their brains be studied. Junior Seau, one of the most iconic linebackers in league history, did the same in 2012. Each tragedy brought the truth closer to the surface. But the league continued to fight, insisting there was no proven link between football and long-term brain damage. The silence wasn't just scientific, it was cultural. The NFL had built its empire on the mythology of toughness. To admit that concussions were causing lasting harm would threaten not only the league's reputation, but also its very product. Parents might think twice about letting their children play. Fans might see every collision not as entertainment, but as tragedy in motion. Billion-dollar television contracts, stadium deals, and marketing campaigns rested on the league's ability to control the story. It took lawsuits to force change. Thousands of former players, many suffering from cognitive decline, sued the NFL for failing to warn them about the dangers of head trauma. In 2013, the league agreed to a settlement worth hundreds of millions of dollars, but even then, questions lingered. The settlement excluded certain conditions, limited compensation, and required players to navigate a maze of bureaucracy. Critics argued it was another way for the league to control the cost of truth. As the science became irrefutable, the NFL shifted strategy. It could no longer deny the existence of the problem, so it began to reshape the narrative. The league poured money into concussion research, promoted new helmet technologies, and introduced rule changes designed to limit head injuries. Kickoffs were modified, helmet-to-helmet hits were penalized, and independent neurologists were added to sidelines. These were real changes, but they came only after years of denial and after generations of players had already paid the price. The stories of those players remain haunting. Men who once stood as gladiators on Sunday afternoons now struggle to remember their children's names. Legends of the game wander through life with fractured memories, depression, and anger they can't explain. Their families live with the consequences of a league that once told them everything was fine. For many, the settlement money does little to ease the pain. The loss is not only financial or physical, it is existential. They gave their lives to a game that did not tell them the truth. What makes this chapter of NFL power so chilling is not only the human cost, but the calculation behind it. The league understood the stakes. Internal documents, uncovered during litigation, revealed that NFL officials were warned about the dangers decades before the public knew. Yet rather than protect players, they protected the shield. The silence was not ignorance, it was strategy. And so, the story of concussions is more than a medical issue, it is a lens into the very DNA of the NFL. Control the science, control the narrative, control the game. That formula, perfected in the concussion crisis, would become a blueprint for how the league managed future controversies. From domestic violence cases to public relations scandals, the playbook was the same. Acknowledge only what is unavoidable. Control the flow of information and move forward before the public lingers too long on the truth. But concussions left a mark that could not be erased. Every youth football program now faces questions from parents. Every hard collision on television sparks debates on player safety. The NFL remains immensely popular, but the illusion of invulnerability has cracked. The cost of silence is no longer hidden. It is visible in the eyes of men who once defined the sport. The chilling truth is that the league did not lose control of the narrative managed to contain it. The concussion crisis could have destroyed the NFL. Instead, through settlements, PR campaigns, and carefully framed rule changes, the league preserved its empire. The players who suffered will never recover, but the shield still stands, polished and profitable. And that, more than anything, reveals the depth of its hidden power. Because if the NFL can withstand a crisis that strikes at the very brain of its athletes, what can't it survive? The NFL has always understood one thing better than any other sports league in America. Football is not just a game, it is a story. And the power lies in who tells that story. For decades, the league has wielded media not merely as a partner, but as a tool of control, shaping perception, hiding fractures, and ensuring that the image of the shield always shines brighter than the truth. From its earliest days, the NFL recognized that visibility meant survival. In the 1950s, when television first entered American living rooms, Commissioner Bert Bell saw opportunity. Games broadcast on Sundays transformed local rivalries into national events. But it wasn't just exposure, it was exposure on the league's terms. The NFL negotiated carefully, protecting exclusivity, dictating how its product was presented, and ensuring that football on television looked like a spectacle worth watching. Every camera angle, every instant replay, every commercial break served a larger purpose: to package football not as chaos, but as drama, a national ritual. The control only deepened under Pete Rozelle, who became commissioner in 1960. Rozelle's genius wasn't just in running a sports league, it was in selling a narrative. He convinced owners to pool television rights, turning individual franchises into part of a collective product. The NFL would negotiate as one, and the profits would be shared. It wasn't just a financial revolution, it was a narrative one. Television networks no longer saw themselves as covering independent teams. They were covering the National Football League, a unified brand. And with that brand came obligations. Networks needed the league's approval, access, and cooperation. Rozelle cultivated close ties with journalists and executives, carefully shaping what stories emerged. When scandals surfaced, the coverage often softened. When players misbehaved, the league worked to protect the image. The symbiosis was clear. The NFL provided drama and ratings, and in return, media partners upheld the myth of football as America's game. This wasn't censorship, it was influence. It was the art of crafting a story so powerful that dissenting voices struggled to be heard. But the true test of this narrative control came in times of crisis. The 1980s brought one of the most visible: the cocaine epidemic in the league. Dozens of players were arrested, some suspended, yet the national story rarely painted football as corrupt. Instead, the narrative leaned on redemption, on men overcoming demons, on the league taking strong action to clean up the sport. The reality that the NFL had tolerated a culture of substance abuse until it became impossible to hide was buried beneath a carefully managed storyline. The same pattern played out with labor disputes. Strikes in 1982 and 1987 threatened to fracture the NFL's pristine image, but coverage often mirrored the league's framing. Players demanding fair wages were cast as greedy, while owners protecting billion-dollar revenues were portrayed as guardians of the game. Networks that depended on NFL access rarely challenged this framing because the league's partnership was too valuable to risk. The NFL's story had become America's story, and anyone who contradicted it risked being cut off. By the 2000s, the relationship between the league and media entered a new era. The rise of ESPN, the explosion of cable television, and the arrival of the internet created more coverage than ever before. Yet, instead of weakening control, it expanded it. ESPN signed billion-dollar contracts to broadcast Monday Night Football and later playoff games. Fox, CBS, and NBC poured resources into broadcasting rights. Every network became not just a partner, but an investor financially tied to the NFL's success. Critical coverage could exist, but it always came with limits. The deeper the partnership, the tighter the leash. This control extended to the stories of violence and scandal that threatened the league's image. In 2014, when video surfaced of Ray Rice knocking his unconscious in an elevator, the NFL initially handed down a 2-game suspension. Public outrage forced a harsher response, but the narrative quickly shifted. Instead of a systemic failure to protect victims of domestic violence, the focus became Roger Goodell's judgment, the league's disciplinary process, and reforms to improve policy. The violence was framed as an individual incident, not as a symptom of broader cultural issues. And as the season continued, the story faded, absorbed into the next week's slate of games, the next round of highlights. The concussion crisis provided another revealing case. For years, Investigative journalists, especially those outside the NFL's orbit, uncovered evidence that the league had suppressed science and attacked researchers. Yet mainstream sports coverage often echoed the league's reassurances. It wasn't until outside institutions like the New York Times and PBS's Frontline forced the issue into the spotlight that the full story began to break through. Even then, the NFL managed to contain it, shaping coverage through strategic partnerships, funding research that told its version of the story, and presenting itself as a league that cared about player safety. The message was clear. The shield might bend, but it would not break. What makes this media power so remarkable is its subtlety. The NFL rarely needs to censor directly. Instead, it builds relationships, controls access, and rewards loyalty. Reporters who break damaging stories often find their sources cut off. Teams can deny credentialing to journalists who don't play by the rules. Commentators who push too hard risk alienation in a media ecosystem where the NFL is the biggest stage. The result is a self-policing environment where those who want to stay close to the game know exactly how far they can go. Meanwhile, the NFL crafts its own media empire. NFL Films, founded in the 1960s by Ed Sabal, perfected the art of myth-making. Slow-motion replays, orchestral scores, and booming narrations turned football into something larger than life. A 3-yard run became a battle, a regular season game became a war, and every player was a hero in a modern epic. This wasn't journalism, it was storytelling. And it shaped generations of fans who grew up believing in football's grandeur. Today, the NFL Network and NFL.com extend that tradition, ensuring that the league tells its own story in its own voice 24 hours a day. The result is that fans rarely see the full reality. They see the pageantry, the rivalries, the triumphs, and the heartbreaks, but rarely the labor disputes, the financial battles, or the long-term health consequences. When controversies do surface, they are presented as obstacles to overcome, not as flaws in the system. The shield always emerges untarnished, and yet, cracks remain. Independent voices, podcasters, digital journalists, and whistleblowers have begun telling stories outside the NFL's control. Social media amplifies moments the league cannot contain, from viral videos of violent incidents to players speaking candidly about mental health. The league still wields immense power, but the monopoly on narrative is no longer absolute. In today's fragmented media landscape, control requires adaptation, not just influence. Still, the lesson of history remains clear. The NFL's greatest strength has never been just on the field. It has been in the arena of perception. By mastering the art of narrative, by controlling the stories told about its game, the league has preserved its dominance even through scandal, tragedy, and crisis. The media has been both partner and pawn, amplifying the drama while muting the damage. In the end, the NFL's hidden power is not just in how it plays the game, but in how it tells the game. The manufactured narrative has shaped how fans see football, how players understand their role, and how critics struggle to break through the noise. It is a reminder that in the NFL, perception is as carefully managed as the playbook, and the story is always written to serve the shield. Because if the NFL controls the narrative, it controls reality itself. Every empire is tested by its scandals. The NFL, despite its dominance, has faced moments that could have torn it apart. Crises that revealed the fragility beneath the spectacle, cover-ups that exposed the machinery behind the shield. Yet time and again, the league has not only survived these storms, it has emerged stronger, reshaping the narrative, redirecting the outrage, and ensuring that the game remains untouchable. The story begins with a simple truth. The NFL is too big to fail. With billions of dollars tied to television contracts, advertising, and merchandise, the league's survival isn't just in its own interest, is in the interest of networks, sponsors, cities, and even governments. That interconnected web creates a safety net, one that allows the league to withstand controversies that might shatter other institutions. But survival doesn't happen by chance. It happens through careful calculation, selective silence, and, when necessary, sacrifice. One of the earliest examples came in the 1980s when gambling cast a shadow over the league. In 1983, Baltimore Colts quarterback Art Schlichter was suspended indefinitely after being caught in a web of betting debts and schemes. The scandal threatened the league's most sacred principle that the integrity of the game could not be compromised. But rather than invite deeper scrutiny, the NFL moved quickly and decisively. Schlichter was banned, the story contained, and the message clear. The Shield would not allow gambling to define its image. Decades later, as sports betting became legal and profitable, the NFL reversed its stance entirely, cutting deals with betting companies. But in the 1980s, survival required a cover-up, a swift response that quelled the storm before it spread. The 1990s brought another test: the rise of domestic violence cases involving players. The league had no formal policy, no consistent disciplinary system. Incidents were often handled quietly, with minimal punishment and little media scrutiny. When Dallas Cowboys star Michael Irvin faced charges for cocaine possession and allegations of violence, the league worked to contain the fallout, emphasizing his rehabilitation and return to the field. It was the same pattern repeated countless times: minimize, reframe, move forward. The image of the NFL as a symbol of family and tradition could not be tarnished, even if the reality was far more complicated. But the most defining crises came in the 2000s and 2010s, when the NFL faced scandals too large to bury. In 2007, Spygate erupted. The New England Patriots were caught illegally videotaping the signals of opposing coaches. For a league that prided itself on fairness, it was a scandal that cut to the core. The NFL fined head coach Bill Belichick $500,000, the largest fine ever imposed on a coach, and stripped the team of draft picks. Yet the league also moved to contain the damage. Videotapes were destroyed by NFL officials, preventing deeper inquiry. Questions lingered about the scope of the cheating, but the official narrative was set. Punishment had been served, and the integrity of the game restored. Critics saw a cover-up. The league called it closure. Just 2 years later, another storm hit: Michael Vick's involvement in dogfighting. The gruesome details shocked the nation, and Vick, once a face of the league, became a pariah. Yet even here, the NFL managed the narrative. Vick was suspended indefinitely, served prison time, and eventually returned to the league, framed as a story of redemption. The scandal was not allowed to linger on the NFL itself, was presented as an individual failing, resolved through punishment and reform. The pattern repeated in 2014 with perhaps the most infamous crisis of the modern NFL: the Ray Rice video. When footage emerged of Rice striking his in an elevator, public outrage exploded. The league had initially handed down only a 2-game suspension. That punishment suddenly seemed woefully inadequate. Under pressure, Commissioner Roger Goodell expanded the suspension and announced sweeping changes to the league's domestic violence policy. Yet critics pointed out that the NFL had access to the video long before it became public. The outrage wasn't about ignorance, it was about exposure. The cover-up failed because the evidence could not be contained. This cycle deny, minimize, respond reveals the NFL's survival playbook. Scandals are never treated as systemic. They are framed as isolated incidents. When punishment is handed down, it is designed not just for justice, but for optics. The league's goal is not accountability, is closure. Once a narrative of resolution is in place, attention can shift back to the field, where the product remains irresistible. Perhaps no crisis tested this formula more than the concussion scandal. Unlike gambling or domestic violence, this was not about a handful of players or isolated teams. It was about the very foundation of the game itself. For years, the NFL fought to control the science, suppress research, and silence whistleblowers. But as stories of suffering mounted, Mike Webster Jr. so, Dave Durson, the truth became impossible to ignore. Lawsuits followed, settlements were paid, and reforms were announced. Yet even here, the NFL found a way to survive. By acknowledging just enough, funding new safety initiatives, and crafting a narrative of progress, the league preserved its empire. The crisis that could have destroyed football instead became another chapter in its myth of resilience. The survival instinct extends beyond controversies of violence and health. It reaches into financial scandals, team relocations, and even political battles. When the city of St. Louis sued the NFL over the Rams' relocation to Los Angeles, the league quietly settled for $790 million rather than risk a public trial. When politicians criticized the NFL for its handling of protests during the national anthem, the league adjusted its policies, struck partnerships with advocacy groups, and reframed the narrative around unity. Each move was calculated to absorb outrage while protecting the core product. What becomes clear in these moments is that the NFL's greatest weapon is time. Outrage burns hot but rarely lasts. The season marches on. New games, new highlights, new heroes emerge, and yesterday's scandal fades into the background. The league understands this rhythm and uses it to its advantage. Delay when possible, deny when necessary, respond when unavoidable, and always keep the focus on the field. The cover-ups, the half measures, the strategic silences, these are not signs of weakness. They are the mechanisms of survival. They show a league that understands its place in American culture too well to let itself fall. Fans may complain, critics may shout, but when Sunday arrives, the stadiums are full, the television ratings soar, and the controversies become background noise. That is the true power of the Shield. Not that it avoids crisis, but that it survives crisis. Not that it prevents scandal, but that it absorbs scandal and emerges stronger. Each test, each cover-up, each survival only reinforces the myth of invincibility. And so the cycle continues, as the NFL prepares for whatever storm comes next. Because in the end, the NFL story is not about perfection, it's about control. And survival, no matter the cost, is the ultimate expression of that control. In the story of the NFL, control has always been a moving target. From the backroom deals of the 1920s to the television contracts of the 1960s, to the concussion lawsuits of the 2010s, the league has thrived by projecting the image of command. The owners hold the purse strings. The commissioner wears the shield like a badge. The players, at least in theory, play their part. The fans are given spectacle, packaged neatly in broadcast windows and ticket stubs. But behind that surface, the question has never gone away. Who really controls the game? It's an illusion that shifts with time. Owners pretend they call the shots, but they are beholden to each other's wallets, to television partners, to sponsors, to the broader cultural tides that shape America itself. Players fight for rights, for salaries, for respect, but their leverage comes and goes in waves. Peaking with strikes and free agency battles, only to recede when injuries pile up or public opinion turns cold. Fans demand transparency, but rarely get it, and yet they're the fuel that keeps the machine running. The truth is far more complicated than the slogans on the billboards. The new face of control. Today, control in the NFL doesn't look like a cigar-chomping owner in a smoky hotel room. It looks like data. It looks like spreadsheets and algorithms and GPS trackers stitched into shoulder pads. Teams use player tracking technology to monitor acceleration, heart rate, sleep cycles, recovery times. Every inch of a player's body is mapped, charted, and monetized. The goal, the league insists, is health and longevity. The reality is that it's another form of control, another way to maximize performance while minimizing risk, another way to turn men into assets that can be bought and sold. Even the game itself is subject to new layers of oversight. Rule changes pile up year after year, each one debated in the echo chambers of sports talk and Twitter. Kickoffs reimagined, tackling techniques redefined. penalties enforced through slow-motion replay that can dissect a fingertip grazing a face. The illusion of control becomes a product in itself. The sense that the league is constantly tinkering, always managing, forever keeping chaos at bay. But no matter how advanced the monitoring systems, no matter how carefully curated the broadcasts, the chaos never disappears. A single hit can end a career. A scandal can shatter trust. A lawsuit can open a door the league would rather keep sealed shut. Players rewriting the narrative in the past, players were often passengers in this system. They signed the contracts, played the games, cashed the checks, and hoped their bodies didn't break before they were forgotten. But in the modern era, we've seen a shift. Social media has given players a voice that cuts through the league's tightly controlled messaging. A quarterback doesn't need a press conference to shape his story. He can do it in 280 characters. A linebacker doesn't need to wait for the union to file a grievance. He can go live on Instagram and call out an owner by name. Control has fractured. The rise of player empowerment mirrors broader cultural changes in America. In the same way that workers in other industries are questioning corporate power, NFL players are beginning to realize that their value extends beyond the field. Endorsements, personal brands, business ventures, these are forms of leverage that older generations never had. Yet, even here, the illusion remains. For every superstar who builds an empire, there are dozens of players clinging to minimum contracts, terrified that one injury will send them packing. The average career lasts just over 3 years. For most, the power is fleeting, borrowed, conditional. The system still wins more often than it loses. Fans as consumers, not citizens. And then there are the fans. The NFL likes to remind them that the game belongs to them, that their loyalty is sacred, that they are part of a football family. But make no mistake, fans are not partners. They are customers. Their relationship to the league is transactional, shaped by ticket prices, cable subscriptions, and merchandise sales. Stadiums, once pitched as civic monuments, have become temples of corporate branding. Naming rights sell for hundreds of millions. Luxury suites cater to business deals, not neighborhood pride. Cities still bend to the will of billionaires, funding new arenas with taxpayer money under the threat of relocation. The illusion is community. The reality is commerce. Yet fans hold a kind of soft power. Their outrage can spark change. Their absence can devastate television ratings. Their collective voice, amplified through digital platforms, has forced the league to address issues it once tried to bury, from concussions to domestic violence to the politics of protest. But even here, control is slippery. The league studies its consumers as carefully as it studies its players, tailoring its response to whatever keeps the product alive. Cracks in the armor. For a century, the NFL has proven almost untouchable. Other leagues have faltered. Other sports have declined. But football has remained America's obsession, its Sunday ritual, its national stage. And yet, even the most powerful empires show cracks. Concussion research continues to haunt the league. Lawsuits may be settled, but science doesn't stop. Every new study is a reminder that the violence on the field has consequences far beyond the highlight reel. Parents think twice about letting their kids play. High schools and youth leagues face shrinking participation. The pipeline that feeds the NFL isn't as guaranteed as it once was. Meanwhile, the economics of the game grow more volatile. Television contracts are massive, but the media landscape is shifting. Streaming, cord-cutting, on-demand viewing, these trends threaten the traditional model. Stadium attendance has declined in some markets. Younger fans consume sports differently, less tied to loyalty, more tied to personalities and moments. The illusion of permanence, of an unshakable grip on America's heart, is just that tan illusion. The future of the game, so what comes next? If the history of the NFL teaches us anything, it's that control never truly rests in one place for long. The league adapts, evolves, reinvents itself to survive. But the future may not look like the past. We may see more player-led movements, more challenges to the authority of owners and commissioners. We may see radical changes in safety technology, helmets designed like aerospace equipment, rules reshaped to the point where the game barely resembles its bruising origins. We may see fans wielding greater influence through collective action, demanding transparency on everything from finances to injuries to diversity in leadership. Or perhaps we'll see something darker. A league so consumed by its own image that it tightens its grip, smothering individuality, commodifying every ounce of emotion, reducing the game to an algorithm. That's the paradox of control. Tighten it too much, and the thing you're trying to preserve slips through your fingers. The final illusion. The NFL sells the idea that it is the ultimate authority, that it can bend chaos into order, that it can control the uncontrollable. But the truth, the uncomfortable truth, is that the game has always lived in the space between order and chaos. It lives in the broken plays, in the moments when a quarterback escapes a sack that should have ended the drive, in the roar of a crowd that shifts momentum, in the injury that changes a season, in the protest that sparks a cultural firestorm. These are things that no owner, no commissioner, no contract, no algorithm can fully control. The league is powerful. Yes, its machine is vast. Its history is littered with examples of dominance and command. But control, in the purest sense, is an illusion. The game belongs to no one and to everyone. It belongs to the men who risk their bodies. It belongs to the fans who pour their hearts into teams that often break them. It belongs to the cities that sacrifice tax dollars and civic pride. And in some strange, fractured way, it belongs to the future, certain, unpredictable, and unstoppable. As we close this journey through the dark side of the NFL, we return to the same question that has haunted us since the beginning. Who controls the game? The owners will say, it's them. The commissioner will insist, it's the Shield. The players will claim their voices. The fans will shout from the stands. But the truth is simpler, harsher, and more liberating. No one controls it. Not fully. Not forever. The NFL, like America itself, is a story of power constantly contested, of illusions carefully crafted, of futures never guaranteed. The game endures because it resists control, because in every clash of bodies and every break in the line, chaos wins a little victory. And maybe that's why we keep watching. Because deep down, we don't come for control. We come for the illusion of its hand, for the moments when the illusion shatters. And so, after a century of struggle, spectacle, and survival, the NFL stands at the edge of tomorrow. The question is no longer how the league built control, but how long it can hold on to it. The deeper I traveled into the story of the National Football League, the clearer it became that this is not a game simply built on athletic brilliance, or fan devotion, or even money alone. It is a game controlled by design. A theater of spectacle where power operates behind the curtain, dictating the rhythms of the drama while ensuring the audience never fully realizes who is pulling the strings. And that, perhaps, is the greatest achievement of the NFL, not just building a sport, but constructing an entire system of control that hides itself in plain sight. From its earliest days in the smoky halls of Canton to the billion-dollar cathedrals of today, the NFL has pursued one consistent mission: to centralize authority, to eliminate uncertainty, and to maintain dominance over every variable it can touch. Owners and commissioners may have changed, players may have risen and fallen. Rules may have been rewritten, but the through line is unmistakable. Control is the DNA of the league. Think back to the fragile 1920s, when the NFL was nothing more than a handful of regional clubs struggling to survive. Already, the seeds of control were planted. Schedules were standardized, rules were imposed, and authority began to shift away from the players and toward the league office. That shift was not accidental, it was deliberate. Without it, the NFL may have dissolved into chaos, another failed attempt at professional football. But with it, the league took its first step toward empire. Decades later, when television arrived, the stakes multiplied. The NFL understood what so few leagues did. Television wasn't just coverage, it was power. It meant visibility, it meant money, and it meant control over how the sport was consumed. By negotiating national broadcasting rights by turning the league itself into the seller of the spectacle, the NFL didn't just ride the wave of television's rise. It harnessed it, it dictated what America would watch on Sundays, and in the process, it elevated itself from a sport to a cultural ritual. And yet, behind the gloss of spectacle, there has always been cost. Labor wars in the 1970s and 80s revealed that the NFL's control extended to the very livelihoods of its players. Strikes were broken, replacement games were staged, and public opinion was manipulated against the athletes themselves. The league knew the truth. Players may be the product, but owners hold the leverage. Through contracts, through arbitration, through the manipulation of free agency, the NFL ensured that its workforce remained contained even as salaries grew. The money became a mask, concealing the deeper imbalance of power. Nowhere was this imbalance clearer than in the concussion crisis. For decades, mounting evidence revealed the damage being done to players' bodies and minds. The league's response was not immediate concern, but calculated control. Scientists were discredited, data was buried, and the narrative was shaped to protect the shield. Only when lawsuits mounted and public outrage swelled did the NFL shift its stance. It did so in ways that preserved authority. The concussion settlement, the rule changes, the emphasis on player safety. These were not admissions of weakness. They were acts of containment, power conceding just enough to maintain itself. But the NFL's reach goes beyond the field and the locker room. Stadiums tell their own story of leverage. Cities desperate for identity, prestige, and economic growth have been drawn into bidding wars, offering billions in public subsidies to lure or keep teams. The league and its owners wield relocation as a weapon, pressing municipalities into submission. From Baltimore losing the Colts to Oakland losing the Raiders. From St. Louis to San Diego, the message has been consistent. Loyalty runs one way. Teams belong to the league, not the cities, and fans are collateral in the negotiation of power. Even culture itself has not been immune. The league has controlled narratives around patriotism, presenting the NFL as inseparable from national identity. From military flyovers to anthem ceremonies, the game has been staged as more than entertainment. It has been presented as an institution, almost sacred. Yet beneath the symbolism lies strategy. By aligning itself with national pride, the NFL insulated itself from criticism. To question the league was to question more than football, was to question America itself. That, too, is power. And as the years have passed, technology has deepened the NFL's control. Instant replay, digital streaming rights. Advanced analytics. Each innovation has given the league new ways to shape how the game is experienced. Gambling, once a taboo, is now fully embraced because it, too, funnels power upward, creating new revenue streams and deeper fan dependency. Every shift, every change, every so-called innovation has been filtered through the same lens. How does this strengthen the league's hold on the sport? The players, the fans, and the culture around it. Yet for all of this, for all the layers of control, the NFL remains adored. Its ratings dominate television. Its Super Bowl is practically a national holiday. Its merchandise fills closets from coast to coast. That paradox that fans love the very system that manipulates them is part of what makes this story so haunting. We cheer the touchdowns, we argue the penalties. We live and die by the fortunes of teams we may never truly know. But behind it all, the league holds the reins. So where does that leave us? On one hand, the NFL has created something extraordinary. A unifying ritual, a shared language, a spectacle that bridges divides. On the other hand, it has done so by exerting control at every level over players' bodies, over cities' finances, over fans' perceptions, over truth itself. The beauty of the game has always coexisted with the brutality of its system. And maybe that is the final truth of the NFL's hidden power. It thrives, not in spite of this paradox, but because of it. The league offers both escape and manipulation, both freedom and control, both joy and cost. It is America's game not because it is pure, but because it reflects the complexity of the country itself, its ambition, its contradictions, its relentless pursuit of dominance. As I reflect on this journey, one image lingers: a player walking off the field in silence. His body broken, his mind clouded, while a stadium roars around him. In that moment, we see both the beauty and the tragedy, the triumph and the toll. And above it all, we see the invisible hand of the league, ensuring that the spectacle continues, no matter the cost. The NFL's hidden power has always been this: to control the game without fans fully knowing. And perhaps the greatest question now is not whether the league will keep that power at will. Well, 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 well. Well, 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 well. Well, 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 well. Well, 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 well. And well, 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 well. See, it's well, 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 well. It's well, 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 well. It's well, 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 well. Well, 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 well. Well, 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 well. Well, 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 well. Well, 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 well. Well, 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 well. The way well, well, well. But well, 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 well. Weeka cateri lob. By seve to me seven ardent goat I say me soda grask I be set. Kip is a sowit gad silites sick I bit it's light to reuse it's it runs sit to he. It will get so the best with the plans. As fans are willing to see it for what it truly is. Because only when we do can we understand the full story of the game we thought we knew.